they start hearing voices, entities talking to them. What I saw with these patients carrying on full-fledged conversations with these things, talking to them, arguing with them, conversing with them, carrying on coherent conversation with whatever these things were. There's different levels of them. So they have the soldiers that are down there tormenting people, and then they have echelon above that.
So you're saying there's multiple entities?
Yes.
That's in their heads?
Yes. They told him, they said, don't tell him anything. He already knows too much. Something gives these people the strength when they get pissed off. They get supernaturally strong. There is no God. I've prayed to God a million times and he's never helped me. So I started passing out the 23rd Psalm to schizophrenic patients on my ward. And I said, when the voices come, read this and tell me what happens. Every single one of them said the voices hated it. Close to 50,000 people themselves in the United States every year. Where did those thoughts themselves come from? The voices told him he murdered somebody, and he was so messed up he didn't know whether he did or not. So he was in this dilemma. Like he went, should I go turn myself into the police? Well, if I turned myself into the police and I didn't murder anybody, they would lock me in a psych ward. If I did murder somebody, they'd lock me in prison. So what the voices were doing is every time they heard a siren, right away it'd be, there they come. They're looking for you. They're right around the corner. You better go hide somewhere. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. Boom. They're evil. They hate the human race. They especially hate kids. That was them. I said, them who? He said, the voices. I said, what in the blazes were they trying to do? They were trying to scare you off. What the hell is this thing?
Jerry, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So you're here almost to blow the whistle.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Please do. I'm here to listen. I'm all ears.
Nobody is being cured by any of those psychiatric drugs. Matter of fact, a lot of them are toxic. So the side effects that they list, including death in some cases, they're toxic side effects. They're with long-term use, they will destroy your nervous system. And they don't tell that to the patients. And I started work at a place called Central State Hospital, which was one of the biggest state psychiatric institutions in the United States, if not the world. When I got there, there were 10,000 patients, down from about 23,000. So there was every kind of mental illness you would ever see in human form somewhere in that institution.
What city was that?
It was Milledgeville, Georgia.
Okay.
The place was the size of a city. It had 200 buildings, had staff dormitories. It had its own...
200 buildings?
Yes. 200 buildings. Not all psychiatric units, but different buildings to support the place. It was the size of a small town. They had their own hospital. They had their own dentist. They had their own food factory where they prepare food. They had their own undertaker. They had their own embalming place.
Undertaker?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's literally like a small town.
It was like a small town. It'd been around before the Civil War. So Sherman actually stationed his troops on the grounds of this hospital. Yeah. And that was back then well before they had psychiatric drugs. So they would chain these people to the walls, the violent psychiatric people.
And that was prior to what?
That was prior to antipsychotic drugs.
That were founded in what, 20th century?
Yeah. Yeah. There was around 1891 when these came into play. And it's interesting how they did because, pharmacology, you ask the pharmacist, big pharma, why are these drugs so expensive? And they'll say, oh, well, because we spend millions of dollars developing them. Mm-hmm. Antipsychotics were found by accident in Germany in a German dye lab, where the workers in that dye lab would get gorked out. They'd start with falling asleep and stuff. So what happened was a French chemist came over there to try to find out what was going on. And they abstracted the active ingredient in this dye that was causing that, and it was phenothiazine. So it was a major tranquilizer. They first started using it for surgery, So they knocked the guy out. So they was like gorked out when they were surgery. And then they found, hey, this might work good with psychiatric patients, psychiatric patients. But in Europe, the Freudians had taken over, and they wouldn't allow that into their system. They wouldn't allow chemical stuff to treat psychiatric patients.
Why?
Because they were all wrapped around psychoanalysts, saying that's the only cure. Psychoanalysis is the only way to treat mental illness.
Talking.
Okay.
Okay.
But that never got anywhere fast either. Nobody was, it was very expensive. It was very time consuming, and they wanted something that would work quick. So they couldn't get it used in Europe. So they brought it over to the United States, to a mental hospital over here. And they started administering it to the patients. So all these schizophrenic and violent psychiatric patients, they just knocked them out. They were just walking around gorked out, sedated. And they went, this is wonderful. They said, this is great. Hey, we don't have to deal with these people. We don't have to fight with them. We can just knock them out and let them roam around like zombies. All right. So at that time, there was a big battle between psychiatry and neurology. Psychiatry was losing badly because they weren't doing anything that was helping anybody. They didn't have these kind of drugs at that time. They didn't have any depressants at that time. And what they were doing just wasn't working. So when this phenothiazine came out about 1891, they started using it as an antihistamine and an anesthetic, and they would drug down the entire population of these mental hospitals. And the psychiatry saw that, and they just latched onto it with, for their lives. And that was their drug from now on. Even today, they don't like regular doctors prescribing it. They insist that they're the experts and that they have the sacred knowledge to administer these drugs. When all they're doing is this, I've watched them over and over again hundreds of times when they see a patient, especially at the mental hospital. So when I got out of graduate school and started off at Central State Hospital, this giant hospital I was telling you about, nothing in undergraduate psychology or the master's degree prepared me for what that was all about. I walked on there, it was like another planet.
Tell me about it. Super curious.
These psychiatric patients, they had them drugged silly, and they were for the most part calm, but there was a lot of things that didn't make sense as far as what I was taught in graduate school. Yeah, and one of the first things I saw that kind of got my attention is one of these days I was making rounds on the psychiatric unit I was assigned to. And back then we had been taught that the only treatment for schizophrenia and mental illness was some kind of drug. That's all that they fostered. Now, the counseling that we had been taught in the master's degree, when you try to apply that to these severe psychiatric populations,
Didn't work.
Didn't work well at all, especially with schizophrenics. Just trying to get a rhino out of the road with a BB rifle. It just had no effect whatsoever. Whatever was driving these people was much more powerful than any kind of rationale you can provide to them. There was something driving them, and nobody understood what.
They were just sedating patients, that's it?
They were just drugging patients. There was some of the people that would try to counsel them. That didn't work with schizophrenics well at all. It worked with the depressant people some, but it wasn't very effective at all compared to the MACE energy method I'm using today, which can get rid of a major trauma in less than an hour, and it's gone. It's not there anymore.
We're going to touch on that a little bit further down the road. Let's get back to the history of the...
So the first thing I saw that didn't make sense as I was doing rounds on this psychiatric unit I was assigned to. And was on the first floor, and a maintenance man was cutting the cap off of a banister, which was a steel pipe that ran up 2 floors of this psychiatric unit. Now, I knew at the top of the second floor there was no cap on that banister. I'd noticed that. I didn't think anything of it. You know, it's like, okay, it doesn't have a cap. And here was a maintenance man cutting the bottom cap off, and I'm like, why is he doing that? You know, and you know, sparks were flying all over the place, and smoke was coming up, and all these patients started accumulating, watching. It was like a little 4th of July fireworks thing. So I just tucked myself in there with the patients, and we all watched this guy cut the cap off together. And when that cap fell off the banister onto the floor, an absolute flood, a waterfall, a gusher of psychiatric medications gushed out of that banister and all over the floor like a waterfall. They had been throwing those psychiatric medications down that banister for decades. There were thousands of different pills came pouring out of there.
This gentleman right here, Mr. Jerry Marzinsky, is the original reason why I went all in, why I doubled down. I borrowed some money from a friend of mine just to get to Phoenix and get this episode done. Why? Because I was told that Jerry is the guy. He is an incredible person, and he has an incredible experience and story. And believe me, when you're gonna watch the entire episode, you're gonna say, Apollo, this is literally a classic. And this episode is going to become a classic, not because of me, but because of Jerry. So guys, I hop in my car in LA. I went to Phoenix for one good reason, to have a sit-down, one-on-one chat with the one and only Mr. Jerry Marzinsky. As I told you before, I'm not financially good right now. This podcast is barely breathing. I do not have any sponsors. I will never advertise you. Crypto scams, NFTs, alcohol, tobacco, and etc. That's why it's so crucial for you to consider supporting my work. See these people? I would love to thank them from the bottom of my heart, because these are the people that supported me the last time. And if you enjoy my show, please consider supporting my podcast as well. Scan this QR code or find the link in the description below and buy me a coffee. Even $5 truly help. It helps me being independent, having my own opinion, and having very different various guests on my show that bring you the best information that they can. And now guys, let's get back to the podcast with the one and only Mr. Jerry Marzinsky.
Wait a minute, so patients didn't take the meds?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, each one of those pills is a vote, you know, and I stooped down, I looked at them, a lot of them were antipsychotic drugs, you know, the phenothiazines for schizophrenia, for psychosis, you know, and I'm thinking, why? Each one of these pills is a vote to not get better or to stay insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why is that happening?
Why don't they want the
Why
treatment?
don't they want to take the drugs?
Uh-huh.
You know? Now, I knew the side effects were awful. There's no doubt about this. The side effects were terrible.
List a few of them. The most common.
Oh, I got a whole list of them here somewhere. Side effects of SSRIs. Let me see if I can find them. Well, they kind of numb you down.
No one is a hurry.
Yeah, they numb you down, dry mouth, sexual dysfunction. You're gorked out, you can't think straight. Nerve akinesia, you start shaking. With long-term effect, there's damage to the neurological system. So the sexual dysfunction, there's an agitated, so you're tranquilized, but you're agitated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like two opposite effects.
Right.
And with
Makes sense.
yeah, it's awful. You know, you feel like you should be calm, but you're not. You know, with long-term effect, it actually starts destroying your neurological system. So what they found was when they started doing autopsies on some of these psychiatric patients who'd been taking these antipsychotic drugs for years, decades, their brains were shrunk like walnuts. And it was one after another after another.
How many X did the brain shrink? Twice?
No, I don't know how much exactly. I never saw a shrunken brain. I just read about it. But I saw the effects. They called it the Thorazine shuffle. So these people would not walk with a normal gait. They'd kind of shuffle their feet. They wouldn't pick them up off the ground. They just shuffle. That was one of the symptoms of the neurological damage that these drugs were causing. Another one was akinesia. They'd shake, of low-key trembling. And then at the worst, they were tongue darting, where the tongue would go. And they couldn't control it. All of these were nasty long-term side effects of these drugs. And of course, they never told the patients this. They never told any patient that I saw how dangerous these drugs could be long-term. They just gave them to them. They told them the regular side effects. Okay, you're going to have blurred vision. You're going to feel sedated for a couple of weeks, but you'll get used to it. It'll level out. Just you might have some blurred vision for a while. They tell them the symptoms that they would notice right away.
Right away.
But nothing with the long-term neurological damage.
Why do people end up in mental institutions in the first place?
There's a lot of reasons. Virtually all of them are traumatized seriously to some degree or another. It's either physical trauma, mental trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma. I think that's the root of most psychiatric disorders is trauma.
So out of 100 people that are in those mental institutions, how many percentage-wise came on their own? 50%?
No, I think in the state hospital, virtually hardly any of them came on their own. Now,
they were administered.
In private hospitals, that's different. So I've worked in state hospitals, I've worked in county psychiatric hospitals, I've worked in mental health centers, worked in private psychiatric hospitals. Most of the ones in private psychiatric hospitals came voluntarily. Not all of them, but the majority of them. In the state hospitals, hardly any.
So when they come voluntarily, what do they tell? I hear voices, I can't sleep, I have these intrusive thoughts. What do they tell?
Yeah, that's for the schizophrenics. Intrusive thoughts, thoughts to harm myself. I can't sleep, losing weight, agitated, paranoid, nervous, inappropriate laughter at times.
All this is a sign of schizophrenia.
Yes.
Okay, what about the people that did not administer themselves, but they were brought there in the state hospitals? Why do they end up there?
Because the people that, the family that they came in from had no other recourse. They didn't have the money to pay for private psychiatric hospitals, or these people were mentally ill and abandoned, and the families couldn't keep them.
What does it mean, a mentally ill person? What does it mean?
Well, it depends on the mental illness. So you got depression, which you know what depression is.
This is a mental illness too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So depressed, you don't want to do a thing. You don't want to wake up from the bed. You don't want to go outside. You don't want to work. You don't want to eat.
You
nothing.
don't have any energy.
And zero energy.
And at the very worst, you're suicidal. It's very hard to function.
Okay, that's one.
That's one.
What kind of a mental illness?
Well, you got bipolar, manic depression, where the guy zooms up and gets very manic, and just then crashes and becomes very depressed. So it's a cyclical thing.
Life is perfect. Life is horrible.
Well, when it's up, it's like they're Superman. They have lots of energy. It's almost like they're on meth or something, And then when it crashes, then they're very depressed, and it just runs in cycles like that.
And how long are the cycles?
It varies.
Days, hours, months, weeks?
Yeah, it could go for weeks.
They can feel like Superman for weeks and then depressed.
And not sleep. They don't sleep when they're in that kind of shape until they just pass out.
Like a hamster, like hamsters. Always
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. So bipolar is what? A chemical disbalance?
Well, that's what they say. And lithium, which they use for it, kind of, and that's the only one where I thought actually worked to some degree, because it would level out, it would attenuate these ups and downs. You wouldn't feel as high and you wouldn't feel as low. It would be somewhere in the middle. Okay. But
That's a lithium, right? That's a
lithium,
metal.
yeah. It was discovered in a spring in Florida. Yeah,
By accident?
by accident. So here's another one where psychiatrists claiming they've done all this expensive research, and the medication was discovered by accident.
So bipolar patients, they have to take lithium year round?
Yeah, and it's somewhat dangerous, especially in Arizona, because, and I've seen this while I was working in the psychology department of the state prison. They give it to them, and if they're out exercising, they would sweat, so the concentration of water in their bloodstream would lower, which meant that the concentration of lithium in their body would increase
Right.
to a point where it was deadly.
Oh,
So
okay.
lithium, in order to work, has to be tested periodically to make sure that it stays in a certain range, because if there's not enough, it doesn't work. If it's too much, it could be dangerous. And in Arizona, where you're sweating all the time, when your water level goes down, the lithium concentration goes up.
And they have to take it all year round for the rest of their lives. What are the side effects, long-term side effects of it?
The side effects of lithium aren't as bad as some of the others. They weren't so troublesome that they came to my attention. I think lithium did more good than it did harm.
Okay, so I've said this is a chemical balance, and you said this is what they believe in. What do you think is a bipolar?
What do I think?
Is a bipolar? Why it happens to people? If it's not a chemical
Bipolar?
if it's not a chemical disbalance.
I am not sure. In that case, it might be, but with psychosis, it's not. They haven't found any evidence. Matter of fact, where that came from was a lie put out by the drug company Eli Lilly in when Prozac came out.
Prozac is a drug.
What's what?
It's a drug. Is it a SSRI? A Prozac.
SSRIs is a Prozac. Yeah, so here I got a little blurb on it. It says it was not until the late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of the chemical imbalance came to the psychiatric mainstream. As Peter Brigham, a psychiatrist, pointed out in 1991, in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. They made it up. There was no evidence showing that depressed patients had any imbalance, any chemical imbalance, but Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders are caused by chemical imbalances. It was a complete lie made up by this drug company with no evidence. And then it seemed to explain, what mental illness was and where it came from. But it was a complete lie. There is no evidence that a chemical imbalance causes depression or schizophrenia. But they ran with it. The drug companies were making a fortune because they had something that sounded like they had a cure, or they knew what they were doing, but they didn't. There's no evidence of a chemical imbalance in the brain of either schizophrenics or depressed people.
So chemical disbalance is basically your body does not know how to produce enough serotonin.
Well, they say it was serotonin. So what their SSRIs did is they blocked the chemical reuptake. So once the serotonin is used by the cell, it has to be destroyed. So there's not a lot of it. Okay, so you can't. The nervous cell can't keep accumulating serotonin. Okay, so it has to destroy it after it's used or before it's used to keep a balance there. So what Eli Lilly said happened is that their SSRIs blocked the destruction of the serotonin, which fired the nervous cells more. There was nothing to it.
They made it up?
They made it up. Okay, and they ran with it. They advertised it. And then the drug companies went, this is great. So they applied it to schizophrenia. There is no evidence. Matter of fact, it's been disproven now over and over again over the years that there is no chemical imbalance in the brain of a schizophrenic. They don't even know what the chemical balance in the brain of a normal person should be. They don't have any test to test for it.
Right.
They never have. There's no objective anything. There's no lab test. There's no EEGs, EKG. There's no test whatsoever for a chemical brain imbalance. They made it
They
up.
just determined that they made it up.
They made it up.
And they ran with it.
They ran with it, and they made a fortune on it. And then if you look in the advertisements now for schizophrenia, they changed it from there is to it is believed that, or it is thought that.
Word game.
It was, totally made up.
Okay, we're going to get to schizophrenia next. What's that psychosis? What is that? Psychosis.
Psychotic?
Yeah.
Well, the simple explanation is they are no longer in this particular reality. They're not in touch with this reality that we're in right now.
Give me an example. What do they feel?
Well, they start hearing voices. The entities talking to them, telling them bad things. And it's always bad things.
So psychotic and schizophrenic are different things?
No, they're the same.
Oh, they're the same. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And
There's different kinds of psychosis. There's different kinds of schizophrenia.
okay.
The biggest, the largest population is paranoid schizophrenia.
What does it mean?
That means they're paranoid. Somebody's after me. Somebody's going to kill me. Somebody's looking for me. Somebody's watching me. Somebody's talking about me.
Okay, but can you be a paranoid without being schizophrenic?
Yes. No. You can be a schizophrenic without being paranoid.
But if you're paranoid, it means you're schizophrenic.
Yeah, well, no, you can be paranoid for good reasons without being schizophrenic. But the schizophrenic is paranoid for no good reason that people can see. But once you start looking into the voices and what these voices are telling them, it's a whole different story.
Please tell me. Tell me more about schizophrenia.
Well, when I got to this big psychiatric hospital, I noticed that the patients who were listening to these voices that I couldn't hear, nobody else could hear, if they listened to them, they got in a whole lot more trouble than the ones who tried to ignore them or didn't listen to them. Okay. So what they taught...
I'm so sorry, but why do they start hearing those voices? Some kind of a trauma?
Usually it's some kind of trauma or drugs. Amphetamines will do it. Amphetamines, I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on amphetamines than any other drug. They take that amphetamine, they're flying, they start hearing voices talking to them in their heads, telling them bad stuff. And they go, oh, this is just a hallucination, which is what psychiatry is calling these voices. Okay?
Hallucinations.
Auditory hallucination.
Hearing something that does not exist.
That they don't believe exists.
It doesn't really exist. And it's random.
Well, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's constant.
Same voice, the same message?
Well, it's a similar messages, and they're all negative.
Okay, so those people that take amphetamine, they get off the drug and then they become schizophrenic hearing voices.
Well, no, it don't, not with all of them. So what the way it happens with meth users is they're using the drug for a good while, and then they get high and they start hearing these voices talking to them, you know, and they just went, well, they think it's a hallucination. It'll go away when I come down. And then they come down and it does go away. It may happen 25, 50, 100 times. And then on the 101st time, they don't go away. They're stuck with them the rest of their lives. And they're just as psychotic as any of the patients in the mental hospital.
Okay, what about trauma? What kind of trauma can cause schizophrenia?
Well, like I said, it's extreme mental, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and drugs. Usually there's a trauma involved with it.
So let's say a person can be, let's say, sexual abuse when she was 5 to 10 years old, and only after a few decades, he starts hearing the voices and becomes schizophrenic?
Sometimes it happens that way. Not always.
Because it can happen right after the trauma, the incident.
Well, sometimes it takes years.
Years.
You know, but usually there's a trauma involved with it, okay? And that trauma helps drive it, which is something psychiatry doesn't understand. All right, so when I was at the state hospital, I was taught all through college that these voices are auditory hallucinations. They make no sense. You think of a hallucination, you go, well, that's some crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense. So that's what I thought.
Like seeing an oasis in the desert?
Yeah, something like that. And then it goes away, you know. But that's not what I saw. What I saw with these patients carrying on full-fledged conversations with these things, talking to them, arguing with them, conversing with them, speaking with them, and carrying on coherent conversations with whatever these things were. I watched one lady arguing with her voices that she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds. And the voices were saying, no, you need to leave the hospital grounds. So she's walking off the hospital grounds while she's arguing with the voices that she doesn't want to go there. She doesn't want to leave the hospital. So I'm wondering, that doesn't make sense. If these are hallucinations, these people shouldn't be carrying on coherent conversations with them, okay? So nobody, there were hundreds and hundreds of staff at this hospital, and none of them were the least bit interested in these voices or what they were telling the patients, And when I would ask them, I go, what are they hearing? What are these things? They go, oh, they're just auditory hallucinations, and just blow them off. No interest whatsoever, And the more I saw these people carrying on these conversations, the more curious I got. And there was one time that this was something that goes back to undergraduate school. We were assigned in abnormal psychology a paper written by a psychologist, clinical psychologist, who said that if two schizophrenic patients meet each other and they have the same hallucination. So if they both think that they're President Roosevelt or something like that, one of them would have to give way and change his hallucination to something else. And even as an undergraduate, I'm going, why would they have to do that? Doesn't make any sense. They're both crazy. Why? So that stuck in my head, and I'm like, I kind of filed it into, I have it doesn't make sense file back at the back of my head there, threw it in there. I was making my rounds one day, and I'm watching this one guy carrying on a full-blown conversation with his voices in the middle of the day room of this psychiatric unit on the second floor. And I hadn't seen him before, so I kind of crept up on him, and I'm trying to listen to what he was saying to these voices, and then he caught me. So he turns around, and I'm like, hi, I'm Jerry, I'm the psych for this unit. I haven't seen you before. Did you just come here? And he goes, yeah, I just got here last week. And I said, what's your name? And he goes, I'm Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And I pulled out that little thing from decades ago, well, they got to change. One guy has the same hallucination, and another, they have to, one of them has to change. Mm-hmm. So I look him in the eye and I say,
I am Jesus Christ.
I am Jesus Christ. You're not. I am. And he looks up and he goes, and he's thinking about it. And I'm like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Because one thing I hated about psychology, there was no proof. You couldn't meet a mental patient. You couldn't go into a psych ward, So he looks around and he finally looks back at me, looks me in the eye, and he goes, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he strolls off. And that was like, boom, that's one lie. One thing I came into this with is a strong distrust for authority. And the second thing, I was an adrenaline junkie.
And you were young? How old were you back then?
Oh, back then I was probably 26, 28, somewhere in there, motorcycle, scuba driving. I was an adrenaline junkie. So picking around in the heads of psychotics was interesting and somewhat dangerous. Mm-hmm. So it was like, after that incident, they friggin' lied to me. Why are they publishing that? Later, I found that 80% of what psychologists in universities publish is not replicable. That means it's garbage.
That means it was one time?
No, a research organization did a follow-up on hundreds of different psychology papers that psychologists published about things. They followed up to see if they could replicate the results that they were writing about, mm-hmm. saying, hey, this works, this works. No, 80% didn't work. It was just made up. And when I was in the PhD program, it was like publish or perish. These guys would publish anything just to get published.
Because of the ego?
Well, the universities demanded it too. The universities are very egotistical. They want that university in the news. So these guys would publish any kind of trash that would be publishable. Just to put it out. And it wasn't true. So that went, I went, boom, okay, what else did they lie to me about? Because like I was telling you, graduate and undergraduate students, not even researchers, can get into a mental hospital or a psychiatric mental health center or a private hospital to do any kind of research. And in the almost 40 years I spent on the front lines of mental health, I never saw a researcher on the front lines. They were all in the universities making up their bullcrap that didn't have any connection with what was really going on.
But why? But it's so interesting.
They won't let them in. They won't let them in. They go, oh, it's too dangerous. Our insurance won't let us. We have nobody to monitor you. We don't know what you're going to do. We might get in trouble with risk management. They have all kinds of, go ahead, try to get into a mental hospital and talk to some of those guys. You're never going to get past the front door.
Okay, but you got.
Well, I was working there.
Mm-hmm.
So I already had the entrance key. Mm-hmm. And then I became curious about what I'd been taught. And that was one of the things I didn't like about psychology is you couldn't get access to the proof. The only thing that I saw proof for was experimental psychology, where you went into a rat lab and you would run these different behavioral schedules, and the rat would do what he was supposed to do according to what the psychologist said he was supposed to do.
A rat?
A rat.
Not a human?
Not a human. But it worked the same with humans. Reinforcement, intermittent reinforcement schedules, shaping of behavior, that worked.
Okay.
But it was one segment of psychology, and it really didn't touch on the mind. It was more a behavioral response to reward or punishment.
So you had this conversation with that patient about him being a Jesus Christ.
Well, that wasn't much of a conversation.
Yeah, 2-3 lines only. But you can have a conversation with the schizophrenic?
Not only did I have conversations with schizophrenics for years, I actually spoke to their voices.
Yeah, but what they talk, does it make sense, or they're just slobs, like something?
No, matter of fact, I have it's a conversation I had with a schizophrenic that word for word what was happening there. Somewhere in here. I know I had it.
Take your time, no worries.
Well, God, I can't find anything in this damn thing.
Don't hurry.
But yeah, you can talk to them. The voices that they're hearing do not want you to know that they're there. So if the voices talk to you, they're punished. So there's this whole
The host is punished.
the voices are punished by there's echelons of them. You know, so there's different levels of them. So they have the soldiers that are down there tormenting people, and then they have a echelon above that where if the regular voice isn't doing a good job, they're removed, and some other voice is put in there to take their place.
So you're saying there's multiple entities
Yes,
that's in their heads?
yes. I sent you that list of patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I saw was that these voices were negative. They were totally negative. They never said anything good. It was always bad.
About the person or about the surrounding world?
About the person or anything else. I know I had that in here too. So that was the first one, is when I started asking about these voices, one of the voices got mad, and they got here it is. They got the patient to go complain to the psychiatrist, saying, this guy's asking me about these voices, my voices, and I don't like it. He's upsetting me. Now, in the psychiatric hospital, they didn't have any security. There weren't any security guards there. All they had was the attendants on the staff, you know. So there was an unwritten rule is that you don't upset psychotic patients unless you absolutely have to. All right. So I was asking, because there's nobody there to stop them. You know, if they go off, the attendants or the staff have to fight him back down again. And they usually give him a shot and knock him out. But somebody could get hurt by that.
Can they become violent?
Oh, yeah.
Physically strong? Stronger than...
Oh, yeah. You know, that's another thing. They became supernaturally strong. You know, when I was working in the prison, that's one of the things. I watched a 150-pound schizophrenic bounce two big guards around the inside of the cell like it was, and they were popcorn.
How is it possible?
They become
Because of
supernaturally strong. The most dramatic one I saw, or I didn't see it, but I got reports from two guards that I really trusted. This was in the Florence prison in Arizona, in a maximum security block. And they were going to move this one psychotic prisoner. They wanted to move him from one cell to another. And he didn't want to move. You know, so this is one of those prisons that have these like three layers of cells, you know. And here's this conversation going on down there, and the prisoner says, I'm not going anywhere. And the guards are saying, cuff up, come on out of there. We're gonna hit you with the pepper spray. And he goes, you pansies. He starts making fun of them, cussing at them and insulting them. And he said, you come on out or we're gonna drench you. And they had like these quart bottles of pepper spray. I don't know if you've ever been around that stuff, but it's nasty.
It's nasty, right?
Very nasty. It burn your eyes. And
Yeah, but there's amount of it.
It's a big bottle of it, you know, and they spray it, and it goes a long way. So they kept telling him, you come on out. And he goes, you come on in and get me. I'm not coming out of here. So they said, we're going to spray you. And so they open up the hatch, and they stick that bottle in there. And he grabs a towel, and he puts it around his head. And they drench him in that stuff. And they fill a hole inside, like 2 bottles of that stuff in there. And it's nasty stuff. And this guy, all it did was agitate him. And the guards, they're like, they can't believe it. They were even suffering because some of it was coming back out the hatch, you know. So he still refused to come out. And then they said, well, we're going to go get the stun guns. Okay, so these are 50,000 volt guns that shoot a little dart that sticks in them, and there's a wire attached. 50,000 volts. And I've never seen anybody stand up to that. Once they're shot, man, boom, they're down. They're out. even these big giant guys, they're out. So they said, well, we're going to get the stun guns. And this was a big psychotic guy. He was really crazy. He said, go get your guns, you know. And he starts mocking them and making fun of them and insulting them. So they go and they get the gun, and they stick it in there, and he, last chance, they fire at him. It goes in, and he didn't drop. He's standing in the middle of the cell, shaking like this, but he won't go down, and he won't come out. So the gun discharges. So they went and got another one. So here's two of these things. They shot him with that one, and when one was charging into him, the other one was charging up. So this went on 13 times. When a normal huge guy would be knocked down, completely knocked down, you know, out. And after the 13th time, the warden came down and he said, stop it, they're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment. All right. So by now, all the prisoners in all these cells are, you know, watching this. It's a battle between the cops and this one inmate. And of course, they're cheering for the inmate. You know, they go like, so they said, you come on out of there. See, what they could have done was turned off his water and not fed him until he, you know, thirsted half to death and came out of there.
Yeah, but it would have taken them 2 days minimum,
It
right?
could have taken 2 days, but, you know, it beat what happened there. I mean, they could have done that. They could have made arrangements for that, you know. But no, it was a power contest between them and this inmate, and they couldn't lose because here's hundreds of inmates watching from these tiers. So they said, we're going to go get the dog if you don't come out of there. Now, the prisoners were terrified of the dog, just terrified, because the dog would rip them to pieces. You know, it wasn't just a bite. I mean, that thing would actually, these were trained attack dogs that cost thousands of dollars that came from Belgium. So they went and got the dog, and they said, come on out of there. We're going to sick the dog on you. And he goes, screw you. You come on in and get me. Send your dog in. So they opened up the door, and this guy's sitting on his bed, and the dog rushes in, and he throws his arm up to block the dog, and the dog clamps down on his wrist. Okay? And it's gushing blood, and he pulls the dog right up to his face with the dog on his arm.
And bites the dog?
No.
No?
He said, sit. He told the dog to sit, and the dog sat. And then he started petting the dog and saying, nice puppy, while his arm is gushing blood, you know.
That's a real story.
Yeah, this is a true story. So then the dog handler's like, oh, what the blazes is going on in there? And everybody's like stunned. And they opened the door, and the dog was attached to a rope. So they, you know, 2 or 3 of them pulled on the rope, and the dog drugged the guy out of there, and then they beat the crap out of him. So they get supernaturally strong when they're in a psychotic state. And where that energy comes from blows me away, because I've seen it over and over and over again.
What does the science say?
Huh?
What does the science say? How does the science explains?
Oh, they don't. They're not even there. They're not even there. They're not even looking. Matter of fact, I was telling you, when I started investigating these voices, that one prisoner he was a patient and at the mental hospital. He went to the psychiatrist and told him, hey, this guy's asking me questions about the voices, and that's upsetting me. I don't like it. So I got pulled up the next morning in the psychiatrist's office, and he tells me, you will not ask these patients about the voices. They're hallucinations, and that's all they are. And you're upsetting these people and making them worse by asking them questions about the voices. And I knew better than that by then. You know, some of them told me what the voices were and how they behaved and that kind of stuff. And I had these patterns where 2 or 3 of these patterns had already come out. But these psychiatrists, you know, a lot of them are just so arrogant. They're like the head of the mental health system, and you don't challenge them. You know, you don't tell them no.
Very well paid?
Very well paid as far as anybody else in the mental health system.
Okay, let's go through those patterns. So the first one is negativity. Second one is anti-religious.
Yeah, so the first thing I noticed when I started asking patients about what are these voices telling you? Now, it took me a year or a year and a half to learn how to talk to them because they don't like talking about the voices. I mean, it never gets them anywhere. So the typical guy he's hearing the voices, he'll tell his friends, hey, I'm hearing these voices and they're telling me bad things and they act weird and then it's kind of not there. And, the friends start moving away from them. Like this guy's weird. There's something wrong with him. He's possessed. And so they lose their friends. So, they may tell their parents. And the voices are telling them the whole time, if you tell anybody about us, they're going to lock you in a psych ward and they're going to drug you up. You're not going to get out. The voices know that ahead of time, even though the person's never been in a psych ward before.
That's a good point.
And they'll tell them that. And if they keep telling them, that's about what happens. They tell the parents and the parents get all worried and they see the person's not acting right. He's not sleeping. He's laughing inappropriately. He's carrying on conversations with somebody that they can't see. And they take him into a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist talks to him for 20 minutes. Hey, I'm hearing voices. I'm paranoid. Da-da-da-da. That's enough for them. They diagnose him, put him on these antipsychotic drugs, these strong phenothiazine tranquilizers. All right. And then you have to take this. This is the only medicine. This is the only thing we have to treat schizophrenia. There is nothing else. All right.
Yeah, but for how long? You're prescribing
they say for the rest of their lives. That's what they're telling them. So here they're putting them on these toxic drugs. They don't believe that there's a cure for schizophrenia, And I've had a number of schizophrenics who completely got rid of their voices, and so have some of the other MACE therapists I've worked with. All right, gone without drugs. It is possible, and even the ones where the voices aren't gone, they're in better shape because you get rid of the trauma. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So something gives these people the strength when they get pissed off. They get supernaturally strong. And it's virtually all of them. When they get angry, they get very dangerous. And that's where the psych ward, when I started working at this hospital, it was just, maybe 5 or 10 years before where these phenothiazines had started moving into the system. They had straitjackets that they would have to fight these guys into and cinch down, So they put them in these straitjackets until they'd struggle until they wore themselves out. Right? That's the treatment they had, or they'd chain them to the walls. Back in the old days. And if you read my book, they had all these other kind of horrible things they would do. Insulin shocks, where they inject them full of insulin, until they went into shock. EEGs, where they'd shock their brain.
You can die because of the insulin if it's too much.
Oh yeah.
Because their sugar drops.
Yeah, they'd actually go into shock, And then after that, they're like worn out and they're not causing any trouble. So psychiatry thought, well, this is a treatment. They even had a lobotomy mobile going around in the 30s, where they'd stick an ice pick up through your eye and scramble your prefrontal cortex. So your brain and your prefrontal cortex was scrambled, and you became like a walking vegetable. I saw one of those guys at the hospital once. I talked to him, and I remember my reaction was, he's just not quite human.
That was science.
That's what
science did that. Lobotomy.
Lobotomy.
Okay, so negativity is one. Anti-religious is the second pattern.
Yeah. So when I talked to them about the voices, they were always negative. They were insulting, derogatory, abusive, destructive, sabotaged them. It was always negative stuff, So I'm like, well, why is it always negative? Why aren't there positive? Why don't they say some positive things or neutral things? Why is it always negative? And it was always negative. And I'm like, why is it running that pattern? Why is it always negative? Why isn't it random like all other hallucinations? They're all over the place. You can't predict what a hallucination's going to do. Mm-hmm. It's all over. Anything could happen. They could see anything. These were always negative. So I'm going, if it's a hallucination, why is it running a negative pattern?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it always negative? That didn't make sense. Right? The second one was anti-religious. a lot of these guys would come to me and say, when I go to church, the voices would get louder. They don't like me reading the Bible. They don't like me visiting the preacher. So one of the things I noticed at the end, I was assigned to a psychiatric rehab center and had a entire floor where I was kind of in charge of. And I'd notice when the chaplain had a activity down in the day room where they had dancing and ice cream and Coke and cookies and stuff, cake, that weren't real common in the state hospital. The schizophrenics never went down there. They always stayed on the dingy ward, laid in their beds, looked at the ceilings, were watching war movies and negative stuff on television. So I saw that one time. I saw it a second time, and I'm like, why is that? It's curious.
Was it only with the Christianity or other religions too? Islam, Judaism?
It's virtually any positive religion.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Most of these guys were, some kind of Christian sect. But they did. I asked them. I said, "Why are you staying here? Why don't you go down with the chaplain and party with the?" I don't like there is no God. I've prayed to God 1,000,000 times and He's never helped me. There's Jesus. Religion's a bunch of crap. They were totally anti-religious, anti-God, anti-Jesus. They didn't want anything to do with them. They were consistently anti-religion. And then one day, one of the patients came to me and he said, I was talking to him about his voices. And he said, the voices came last night and I prayed the 23rd Psalm and they got furious. They hated it. And I went, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? Why would they hate the 23rd Psalm? Mm-hmm. So what I started doing was getting copies of the 23rd Psalm, and there was no shortage of schizophrenics at the state hospital. Had plenty to work with. There wasn't like a mental health center where you get one every once in a while. I mean, there were plenty. And in the prison too, there were plenty. So what I had to do is be very careful, because that psychiatrist had threatened me, saying, if you keep asking questions about the voices, you're going to be in trouble. So I had to put it in first gear and go very slow and try not to upset these guys. So I started passing out the 23rd Psalm to other psychotic patients or schizophrenic patients on my ward. And I said, when the voices come, read this and tell me what happens. Every single one of them said the voices hated it.
Can you remind me what's the Psalm 23?
Psalm 23, they hated it.
What about? What's about it?
Because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of my enemies, and my cup runneth over. Something like, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever.
Okay.
That's basically it. I think I might have missed a line or two.
So it's basically a statement.
It was a prayer,
mm-hmm.
and they hated it. The voices absolutely hated it. They went nuts. So I went, well, whatever they hate, I'm going to give them more of it, So then I got caught doing that, and it was like, you can't be doing that. The administration is telling me. That's a chaplain's job or whatever, not that. But I already saw it. And so I started asking these schizophrenic patients about what was it like when they went to church. And it turned out there were 3 groups. If the voices were weak, when they went to church, the voices would shut up. If the voices were moderate, they would get louder, and they would block out what the preacher was saying. And they'd say stuff like, Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you? This is a bunch of crap. Why are you wasting your time in here? And they would tell the patients that I was a nutcase and not to listen to anything I had to say. If the voices were very strong, they would run out of the church. They would actually get up and run out of that church. Yeah. So there was a pattern to that too. So here's a second pattern.
The first one, weak would stop, middle would amplify, and the third one was what?
Where the voices were so strong that the patients
they could hear,
jump up and run out of the church. They would be driven right out of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Second pattern. So it's like these things are running patterns. If they're patterns, they can't be hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept looking and looking. The third one is they foster and create negative emotion. The reason they're saying negative stuff is because they want to create that negative emotion, and then they draw it out of the patient. So what I'd notice is that after the voices attacked the person, they didn't have any energy left. They were wiped out. You know, I had one guy that told me that when he got, they would tell when I got to the prison, things were different because, you know, if a schizophrenic went to the warden or the captain or any of the other staff and said, hey, this guy's asking me about voices, they would go, get out of my face. You know, I got better things to do than listen to this crap. You know, get out of here. You know, but in that state hospital, that was a big thing. So I had to really slow down. Once I got hired in the psychology department at the state prison, there was still tons of schizophrenics to work with. But now I could do what I wanted. You know, they weren't going to, if they complained to somebody, nobody's going to listen to that bull crap. So what I did is I got a group of maybe 15 or 17 schizophrenics that agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them. You know, so while I'm working with them, while we're talking, they're telling me what the voices are saying. So I was able to talk to the voices through them. And the voices didn't like me. Matter of fact, they told one patient, they told him, they said, don't tell him anything, he already knows too much. And I'm like, that's odd. Yeah, that kind of took me aback, you know. And there was another time where when I was working, after I got out, retired from the prison, I was working psych crisis in emergency rooms in hospitals all around Tucson. I came on the shift one day, and the psych nurse assigned me who I needed to evaluate. And there was a girl in one of the psych beds that, you know, I saw her when I came in, never saw her before in my life. And when I started talking to her, she said, the voices told me to stay away from you, that you were dangerous. And I went,
How is it possible?
They knew. They knew.
Okay. When those patients talked to you, did they change their voice?
Very seldom did that happen. You know, sometimes it does just a little bit, but it wasn't. See, that's what's so dangerous about these things. You think they're voices and they're talking and they're upsetting these people and they're draining these people, telling them bad things. You would think it would be like, where are the voices? And you know, like something different, you know, taking place in their heads. And when I was at the state hospital, I was wondering, it was like years. I spent 7 years there working with these psychotic patients, and there was one day I got to wondering, what do these things sound like? What are they actually hearing? What are the patients actually hearing? So I prayed. I said, Lord, let me hear these things so I know what they sound like. You know, and I went for, you know, maybe 2-3 weeks. Nothing happened, and I went, well, you know. And then what I would do is I'd come back from working on the wards, which was stressful, and I'd go swimming. You know, I was like a fish in the water. I loved swimming. I was a certified scuba diver. I'd spent a lot of time underwater by then. I knew how to survive in the water if something happened. I mean, so I'd go at sunset when the motorboats would start disappearing from the lake, so I didn't have to worry about being hit by a motorboat. And one day I'm just, after work, I put on my swimsuit. I'm heading out into the water, into this lake, and the water was bath warm. It was just smooth surface, just, you know, perfect swimming. And I started cutting through the water, and it was like a meditation. You know, I just balanced how much air I was using with my effort, and I was just cutting out. And it was like a meditation. And after a long while, I started getting tired, and came up and I go, well, where am I? You know, and I look, and I was far from the shore. And I looked around and I went, well, I'm too tired to make it back there. You know, so I'll just hang around out here for a while until I rest up. So what we were taught was something called a dead man's float, where you put your hands behind your back and you lean over, take a big deep breath and lean over, and you're just floating there with your legs hanging below you, and your arms are behind your back. And then when you run out of air, you bring your head up, you blow out all the air in your lungs, and then you start sinking right away. And then you have to fill your lungs before your head goes under. So it's like, you'll, and then as you sink down, and then you go down maybe 2-3 feet, and then you'll bob back up again, and you just hang there motionless. It doesn't take any energy whatsoever. And so basically all you're doing is moving your head up and down, blowing out air, sucking in air, and then back down again. You're just like floating.
But laying on your back is not enough?
No.
You're not going to rest?
That doesn't work well. This works better. You just, hands behind, you're just floating. No effort. You don't have to move, And what happens when you sink down, you sink down to a certain level, and then the buoyancy picks you back up, you float back again. So the first time I I do this, and I'm sinking down, I come back to the surface, and here's this thought comes through my head, like it's telling me, you're too far from the shore to make it back, which was true.
Okay.
I was too tired. I knew that. It wasn't an issue. It didn't bother me. I wasn't worried about it at all, And the sun's starting to go down, which was true. Again, I wasn't worried about it, and it was like a yes set that said something else, like you were sinking toward the bottom. All these things were true. And then it kicks in, it throws in, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, where the blazes did that come from? Wasn't in my mind. It wasn't anything I was worried about, not at all. It wasn't my thought. And I'm like, where did that come from? So I do it again. And I'm sinking down, same thing happened again. So it was a yes set. It's the same thing a salesman does. Hey, I got this neat vacuum cleaner. It cleans your house super well. You saw how well it worked. It's quiet, it's efficient, yeah. And you want one, right? So it was like a yes set. So the second time I do it, the same thing happened. You're too far from the shore. Sun's starting to go down. If it gets dark, you're going to get disoriented and you won't be able to find the shore. I wasn't really worried about any of this, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, I'm going to drown. And I'm like,
did you start believing it?
Did what?
Did you start believing it? That you're going to drown?
No, I never believed it, So I'm like, I'm going to spite this thing. I don't know what it is. It's not me. I'm not worried about this. I'm not going to drown. I have no concerns about it. I've been in a much worse situation than this before scuba diving. So the next time I go down, instead of holding my breath, I let air out. All right. So I started sinking further. So by then it was like sunset. It's dark under there, and I'm sinking down, and I hit what they call the crush depth. So now the water pressure pushes your lungs in. You're no longer buoyant, so you start sinking faster. So I'm already kind of weirded out with whatever's going on, and I'm started sinking very quick, which kind of goes in with whatever this thing was telling me. So when I started sinking real fast, I shot to the surface. And here it comes again. Too tired to make it to the shore. Sun's going down. You're going to get disoriented. And now you're panicking. I wasn't panicking. Even before I got to the surface, I knew what was causing that sinking. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing? And it's loud. I mean, it was like a very clear thought. Boom, 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 boom. So next time I went down again, I let the air out, sunk quick. And then I felt something really cold moving up my legs. I mean, pretty quickly. And I shot to the surface again. And even before I got there, I knew what it was. It was a thermocline, a layer of cold water that usually lays on the bottom of the lake or ocean because it sinks and it's heavier than the other water. So I shot to the surface again, and here it comes again. You're too far from the shore. You're tired. You can't make it back just yet. The sun's going down. It's getting dark. And you're panicking, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So take another breath, go down, let air out, sink all the way through into the thermocline, and I feel the cold water coming up past my whole body. And then on the other side of the thermocline, it's warm, which surprised me because I'd never experienced that before. Usually when you hit it, it goes all the way down to the bottom. I passed all the way through it, and then I felt something creeping up my legs. It was like, oh, what is that? And it shot to the surface again. And I realized it was the muck at the bottom of the lake. Because as far as I walked out into the lake, the whole time I was swimming there, it was rocks. So I assumed the whole bottom was rocks. No, it wasn't. So I hit the surface, and this time it starts running the same retinue. You're too tired, it's getting dark, you're panicking, and there's a motorboat coming at you. And I'm like, I didn't hear any motorboat. Usually you can hear sound way far away, underwater, because it travels much better than in the air. And I didn't hear one. So I look around, and sure enough, out in the distance is a motorboat coming right in my direction. So here's this thing going, they can't see you. I said, oh, okay, I understand they can't see me. And they're going to hit you, and that propeller's going to chop you to pieces. And I'm like, I'm not worried about it. I had to dive under motorboats before when I was scuba diving. If I need to, I'll dive down below it and stay there until it passes over. I didn't like that. It wasn't my optimal choice,
Right.
but I knew I could do it if I had to. So I'm watching this thing, and it's coming right at me. And then I'm watching as it goes past. It was like maybe 50 feet away. And I turned to watch it as it goes past. And then I turned my head around, and the wake from the motorboat washed over my head as I was taking in a breath of air. So I started choking on the water and spitting it up, and that thing was having a ball. You're choking. You're going to drown. You're too far out. You can't make it back. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing? So I go down again, let the air out, go through the thermocline. My feet stick in the mud, and I'm laying at the bottom, and it's pitch black outside by now. I can't see anything in the water because it's black. And I'm laying at the bottom of the lake with my feet stuck in the mud and my knuckles hanging like this, just maybe 6 inches above the bottom. And I'm just floating there. Everything was shut down. There was no sight. There was no sound. There was no feeling because it was like bath water. There was no feeling. All my senses were shut off as I was stuck in that mud. And the only thought I had is I'm aware that I'm aware. And it was like a peak experience. It's like that's what's there once you take away all the senses. It's just this consciousness, this raw consciousness that's aware that it's aware. And it was like a peak experience, And I only could hold my breath for maybe 20 seconds while I was down there, but I'll never forget it. It was like, this is who I really am. And I got to the surface, swam to the surface. I was okay by then. This thing was gone.
Stopped.
It stopped, and I slowly swam back to the shore, but I'll never forget it. So what it sounded like was just like my own voice that I hear thousands of times a day, but the intent and the content was very different. That's what they sound like. So they invade the schizophrenic, and they sound just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through his head on a given day. You can't tell the difference.
So you couldn't tell the difference.
But the content is very different. The intent is very different. They're always negative. They're anti-religious. They foster negative emotion. And we run through this whole thing again, so that there's all these patterns that they run. So you can recognize them by the patterns. So they actually suck your energy. So they create the negative emotion because it has to be negative. They can't stand positive emotion. They can't stand the person being happy, laughing. They won't let them watch comedy. They get bored. They drive them toward watching war movies and murder mysteries and all these horror shows. Like you look on television, you turn these things on, and like, why are people watching this crap? Why are they attracted to this garbage? It's these things that are feeding off of that. So once I noticed that they were sucking their emotion, I also noticed that the schizophrenic wasn't aware of that. because they were feeling so bad anyway. That was one of the things that they thought, well, it's just one of the many things that go wrong. So I remember one of the prisoners came in and he said, the voices hit me hard last night, and I was so drained by the time I got out of bed. I felt like I was working with a pickaxe in the hot sun all day. All right. And I said, well, where'd your energy go? And he goes, I don't know. They weren't aware.
Do schizophrenics watch TV? Listen to music?
But it's usually negative stuff. Murder mysteries, bad news, war stories.
Attracted to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say there's a hall and let's say 20 to 50 schizophrenics are in the room. If you turn on the comedy show, they're not going to watch it?
They wouldn't like it. They probably get.
They're going to turn away or just turn it off, switch the channel?
They'd probably complain or say change the channel or we want something else or just get up and leave.
But once you switch to a war movie, they're going to watch it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You could see the stuff they were reading as I would go through their rooms. It was murder mysteries, war books. It was all negative stuff, all negative. And that feeds these things, that negative emotion that it generates. That's why they never told them anything good. It's always bad.
Would you say TV shows like this, let's say murder mysteries, there are stories, horror shows, do you think they create trauma inside a normal human being just by watching? When you watch the screen, when someone is getting raped, killed, tortured.
Yeah. I think it to some degree it does. I remember when I was a little kid and my dad took us to see Dracula in the drive-in theaters. I remember being terrified in the back seat, kind of not trying not to watch it. But yeah, those things, and one thing people don't understand is they don't just hit schizophrenics. They hit us all.
Right. That's what I'm asking. Mm-hmm.
All of us, So you might be walking down the street and all of a sudden, somebody cuts you off or something and here's this, whack him upside the head, man, knock him out, that kind of thing.
Or you're going to get hit.
Yeah.
You see that guy? He's going to hit you right now. Be careful.
Well, be careful of this guy, the paranoia kind of thing. But it's always negative.
And then we have some kind of a deja vu moment. Yeah, I've seen this on a TV show. I've seen this in the movie. The guy was walking by and they just jumped on him and just beat the shit out of him.
Right. You get that kind of stuff. And, people aren't aware. Nobody asks where thoughts come from.
Mm-hmm.
You won't find psychiatry asking where these thoughts come from. You won't find psychology asking where thoughts come from. You won't find social work asking where thoughts come from. They don't even have any idea, and they don't want to know because they can't measure it.
You can't.
But they hit everybody. So one example I had was I was out in my backyard in Tucson cutting the cactus, starting to take over. I had this beautiful husky, pure white husky. And I had the big machete. I'm chopping off these branches to clear some of this out. And she runs by while I have this machete up in the air. And this thought booms through my mind. Chop her head off. Loud. And I have the machete up, just as she runs by. And I'm like, whoa, that wasn't me. That happens to people all day, every day, but they don't realize where it comes from. There are entities out there that don't like us, and they put these thoughts in our head, and they sound just like your thoughts, just like that thing that I put up with at the lake there. That sounded just like my thoughts. There wasn't any, we're the monsters. No, it sounded just like one of my normal thoughts. And that happens to everybody. They hit all of us. But they go after the weakest first. So they go after the ones that are sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused. They already have a negative orientation. And it doesn't take much to get them to generate more negative energy. So I started asking these schizophrenics, well, where does your energy go? And they go, oh, I don't know. And so I say, listen, if you were sitting around a fire and you stuck your hand in a fire 100 times, and every time you got burnt, what's burning you? And they go, oh, the fire. They didn't have any trouble with that. So I said, okay, you've been hearing these voices for 10 years. Every time you hear them, you feel drained. Where do you think your energy went? They'd go, I don't know. They were being blocked from understanding that these voices were they're parasitic. They're sucking their energy. They're taking it, but they have to turn it negative first. No. So if they can't turn it negative, they can't use it.
What about fear? A lot of people...
They love fear. They feed off of fear. They feed off of anxiety. They feed off of guilt. They feed off of anger. Every negative emotion is food for them.
So let's say we turn on TV show, news on TV, right? Everything's always bad. They run on fear. Gas prices are high. War in Iran, war in Gaza, war in Russia and Ukraine. They feed off those emotions.
They feed off of that fear. They feed off of that anxiety. And a lot of our
and it drains our energy.
The what?
It drains our energy.
Oh, yeah, it drains your energy.
Everything's bad. I'm not going to be able to pay the rent. I'm not going to be able to buy groceries.
Well, you look at the suicide rate in the United States. Close to 50,000 people kill themselves in the United States every year. Where did those thoughts to kill themselves come from? Nobody asked that. The friggin' psychiatrist will give SSRIs, and here's some of the side effects of these antidepressant drugs: nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, and seizures.
I don't know if that's not worse than being depressed.
Yeah. It doesn't cure anything. None of these psychiatric drugs cure anything. All they do is treat the symptoms. And you look at the side effects, what's worst. So one thing that was strange was, remember I told you I saw all those drugs pour out of the banister, and I'm asking, why aren't they taking their drugs? Why are they choosing to stay psychotic, which is what it appeared to me? Why are they choosing to stay crazy when if they take these drugs, at least they can minimally function? They're not, the voices get lower. They usually don't disappear, but they get weaker. Okay, but then there's all these nasty side effects. Here's one for Geodone, the antipsychotics: skin rash, restlessness, inability to sit still, constipation, dizziness, drowsiness, excessive saliva, extrapyramidal disease, which I was telling you, the destruction of the nervous system. Okay, headaches, nausea, weight gain, chest pain, fast heartbeat, low sodium levels. They can't think straight. They can't feel right. And that's just a small segment of them. So these things aren't curing anything. They're just treating the symptoms.
Okay, so those patients that did not take the pills, they were told by those voices to not take the pill?
Yes. So I wanted to find out where that came from. Okay. So what I did is I did an experiment, and this was at the state hospital. I was working in a psychiatric rehab center then, and if the only thing we knew, the only thing we were brainwashed with, is that if they don't take their pills, they're never going to recover. So we believe that. So if they went off their pills at this rehab center 3 times, we would discharge them and try to move somebody in who would stay on their pills. Because psychiatry believed that was the only treatment we had. That was the only treatment there was. You had to take them for the rest of your life. So if they just stopped taking their pills 3 times, we would discharge them and try to put somebody in who would stay on their medicines. So there was this one girl who was in the cosmetology course. She was doing good, making good grades. And she went off her meds the third time. Okay? And I couldn't figure out why they were doing this. So what I would, well, let me backstage a little bit. There's one experiment I did with the ones that went off their meds. Okay? So if they went off their meds on my caseload, I would bring them in and I would ask them, why did you go off your meds? You knew what was going to happen. You've gone off your meds a bunch of times before. You know what happens when you go off your meds. You go crazy. You lose it. You end up in a psych hospital. Why did you go off your meds? Every single one of them said, the side effects are awful, which was true. Okay. So I went, okay. So I went to the DSM, which is their dictionary of psychiatric disorders, and got a very detailed description of what it was like to go psychotic. Hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations, seeing monsters come out of the wall, people laughing at them, paranoia, demons attacking them, all the horrible effects of psychosis, which is like hell on earth. Okay? And I got a page full of those things that happen to them when they're psychotic. And I brought them in, and when they told me the side effects, I said, okay, here, take this piece of paper and write down some of the side effects you had to those medications. So they write down 4 or 5 of them because they didn't all have the same side effects. All right. And I'd take that back, and then I'd give them a whole sheet, of symptoms of psychosis. And I said, okay, each one of these nasty symptoms you've experienced when you were off your drugs, put a check mark next to those. Right? And they put a check mark next to a bunch of nasty things that happen to them when they're psychotic. So I took both of them back and I gave them back to them. I said, which is worst, the side effects of the med or going totally crazy in the hell of psychosis? Every single one of them said the psychosis was worst.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Every one. So I'd ask them, then why did you stop taking your meds? You know what they said? I don't know.
Okay, that doesn't make any sense.
It didn't make any sense to me either. But then picking up from that story I was about to tell you with the girl that was in the cosmetology class. Okay, on her meds, doing great, making good grades. She probably could hold down a job if she stayed on her meds, but she kept going off. So she went off a third time, and I had to call her mother and said, listen, she's not staying on her meds. We're going to have to discharge her. And her mother just virtually begged me, said, please don't discharge her. I can't deal with her here. I can't. I'll come up there and we'll find out why she went off her meds. And I went, a mother's going to help me try to find out why her daughter went off of meds. I said, okay, come on up. So we set up a Friday afternoon, and she drove up from South Georgia, which was a long drive for her. And she comes up, and I talked to her. I said, she was doing good. She would have made a good cosmetologist had she stayed on her meds. But the rules are that we got to discharge her because she went off a third time. And he's begging me, please don't do that. So we bring the girl in, and both of us are asking her, why? Why did you go off your meds? You knew what was going to happen. You know what happens to you when you go off your meds. You get crazy, you get stupid, you end up in a psych hospital or locked down somewhere. You know what happens when you do that, all right? Why did you go off your meds a third time when you knew that you were going to be discharged if you did that, okay? So she was disrupting the cosmetology class when her cosmetology teacher called me and said, come get her out of here. She's going crazy. She's talking to voices. She's laughing, doing crazy things. So I brought her up. And once we got her back on her meds, then I brought her mother in and we're talking to her. She's now stable on the meds. She's not crazy like she was. And I asked, why did you do that? Why did you go off again? You knew what was going to happen. You knew you were going to be discharged. Why? She goes, you won't believe me. And I say, listen, I've heard a lot of weird things when I've been here. I don't think you're going to say anything that's going to throw me off kilter, And I said, tell me, why did you go off your meds? She said, the voices were telling me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me, and these symptoms were proof that he was poisoning her. And the voices convinced her that these negative symptoms due to the drugs, all the nasty side effects, was proof she was being poisoned, which was true. In one sense, it was true. She was being poisoned by these drugs, and these nasty side effects were the symptoms of that poison. All right? But then another couple of things clicked, because another thing I couldn't figure out is psychiatrists were being assaulted at a rate much higher than any of the other staff at the state hospital. They were being assaulted higher than regular medical doctors. They were being assaulted more than psychiatrists, more than counselors, more than psych nurses who were dishing out the medications, more than any other staff other than attendant staff, okay, who was with them 24 hours a day. And they were only spending 15 to 20 minutes a month with these people, and they're only asking them, how's the medicines doing? And if they say, well, I'm still hearing the voices, then they would increase the drugs. Or if they made any kind of complaint at all, they would increase the drugs or they would change it. Everything had to do with the drugs, right? There was no talking to them. There was no trying to understand what was going on. It was all medicines. Up the dose, lower the dose, change the meds. That was it. 15, 20 minutes. And they were being assaulted at a higher rate than dentists or anybody else. And I'm like, why is that? When this gal told me this, click. Now it made sense, because I'd heard that before from other psychiatric patients that were telling me the doctor's poisoning me. Yeah. So that explained the high assault rate. And it also explains the murder rate of psychiatrists. They're being killed at a high rate, And their suicide rate is right up there with the schizophrenics. So schizophrenics kill themselves.
Psychiatrists?
Huh? Yeah.
They commit suicide?
Yes. At the same rate that schizophrenics do, just a hair below it. So here's the most regressed psychiatric patient, the patient that's usually in worse shape, that kill themselves 3 to 5 times higher than the general population does. Mm-hmm. And psychiatrists are right behind them.
Why? What's the reason?
Either these negative things are getting to them, or they're realizing that what they're doing doesn't make any sense. They're not helping anybody. They might realize they're causing more damage than they are harm. But their suicide rate is right on up there. Right?
So schizophrenics have these quote-unquote hallucinations, audio hallucinations,
auditory and visual. So they'll see things. They'll see monsters coming out of the wall. They see shadow people, but the shadow people aren't so much hallucinations. Meth people see them. They're 3-dimensional shadows. Matter of fact, I brought I got to find this because I know I had it when I left. It's a statement that a fella sent me who could actually see these things. Okay, here was the assault rate on psychiatrists. The assault rate on psychiatrists, a study of 120,000 assaults from 1987 to 1992 over 5 years. Assault rate for all jobs was 12.6 per 1,000. Assault rates for doctors other than psychiatrists, 16.2 per 1,000. Assault rate for custody staff. These are the people who are on the wards with these psychiatric patients all day long, all night long. 69 per 1,000. Assault rate for psychiatrists for the very little time they spend with these patients, which is usually less than an hour, and in public institutions, 15 to 20 minutes a month. Okay,
a month.
The assault rate for them is 65 per 1,000, or 5.9% that of the normal population. So they're being assaulted at a higher rate than virtually anybody else.
Because all of them believe that they do harm to them. They poison them.
That's part of it.
Part of it.
Now, these entities might be getting them also. You know? So I was going to read you this. This came in from a guy who I was able to do 2 interviews with him before his family said, you know, I'd love to get him to talk to you if he would. But if he does, it's going to have to be with no face.
Okay, I got it.
You know, so this is where he contacted me. He said the subject was testimony related to your work. He said, I had an experience years ago in my early 20s. It was a period when I was flooded with some of the most evil thoughts that oppressed me day and night, disguised as my own. So he realized that these thoughts weren't him, but they sounded like him, you know, and they were disguised as his own. It's one of the most dangerous things these psychotic voices do. They tell the patient that we're your thoughts. We are you. You know, matter of fact, I had a couple of patients that asked them, who are you? What are you? And they would say, we are you. So once they believe that, these things can take control, because if the psychotic patient believes that those voices are actually who they are, talking to them, something else has taken control of them at that point. You know, they have to make that break. If they're ever going to recover, they have to understand that those voices are not them. They're coming in from somewhere else, and they're not good. You know, they're the enemy. You know, and the voices will tell them, hey, you know, we can tell you this, we can show you this, we're your friends. And they will actually act like they're friends when they first start off. You know, oh, we can tell you this stuff, that stuff, and some of it's true, you know. And then they'll stab them in the back later on.
So you got this letter. Please continue with the letter.
So that's important. This guy knew. He said these nasty voices were disguised as my own thoughts. He said, just giving you a summary. He said, something inside me knew that they were not me, but they were disguised as my own voice. But due to the negative and evil nature of them, I wasn't completely concerned or convinced it was me. That's critical for schizophrenics to understand. The voices are not them. There's something coming in from the outside. They're aliens. You know, they're parasites. They drain their energy. They tell them bad stuff. They get them in trouble with people. They're not their friends.
But it can get even worse then, because the moment you realize there's someone or something in my head that's not me, how can I get this out?
Yes, how can I get it out? But if you don't realize that, then you're never going to get it out, because you think it's you.
It's me talking to me.
And the prison,
Why should I listen to myself?
Is full of those kind of people who think those voices are them. They're never going to recover. They have to understand those voices are not them. They don't come from them. They don't belong to them. So that's what this guy's saying. You know, I realized they weren't me. They weren't who I was. He said they drove me to, it drove me to go to church, and I had a spiritual experience, but the thoughts continued for months, day and night. He said, I sought God day and night. To make a long story short, I had an experience where I came home from work one day, exhausted. I laid on my bed. The next thing I know, I got up out of my body and looked, and down below me was my body in the bed. He said, I began to walk down the hall, and all around me were multiple dark entities passing through each other, and one would jump up toward me and say something evil, just like the voices, and then would run back into the crowd of them. It happened all the way down the hallway. I quoted scripture, and they hissed, and they were very uncomfortable. I then entered back into my body and got up, and he said, feel free to reach out to me. Okay, so I did work with him a couple of times. He said these things looked like miniature Spider-Men. They were dark.
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man. You know, Spider-Man with the hood. And, you know, he said they were about that high, and they were like, he couldn't see the faces. There were no faces. And they were on each side of the hall from him. And as his spirit walked down the hall out of his body, he said he watched each one jump up and say something nasty that exactly matched what the voices had been telling him. And then that went back into the crowd, And another one from the other side would jump up and then say something else nasty, like you're no good, you're evil, you're rotten, you're ugly, you're stupid. You know, that's the kind of things they say. Every negative thing you can think of that would upset you, that's what they tell these people. And he said all the way down that hall that they kept jumping up and telling him the same exact things that the voices would say to him on a regular day. Right? Now, this is the kind of thing that Brian works with. So, you know, I'll work with like the less severe mentally ill. I won't touch the ones that Brian goes after. You know, the ones that wither and scream and holler, and that's past my pay grade. You know.
Okay, when was that moment when you realized that this is something that you hear or see is basically from a kind of a sci-fi movie? Where did you realize that this is true?
You know what? It took years.
Because it's hard to...
I did not want to believe that these things were entities. That they just like, I don't believe in demons.
Right.
It must be something in their subconscious or, you know, some da-da-da-da. But these patterns kept going on and on and on. You know, so I'll just quickly read through them.
Please.
They foster and create negative emotion. And anybody who's looking at this, I posted these patterns on my website. You go and pull them up and ask your schizophrenic patients whether they are experiencing these, and you'll see they are. And if they're running patterns, these are not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia tells you. You know, how can a hallucination run all these patterns? Hallucinations don't run predictable patterns. These are consistent, predictable patterns. They happen with all schizophrenics. Not all of them, but most of them. Okay.
But why don't you ask even yourself if you feel down? Maybe you'll find some patterns that you feel or hear every day. It's like negativity.
Yes.
You're not worthy. You're fat. You're a piece of crap. You're this, and that. Then maybe you can realize this is not me talking to me. This is
You're right on. You're right on. That's exactly the kind of stuff they say.
You might be not schizophrenic, but you hear those voices.
But the thing is, it sounds like their own voice telling them that.
You're going to lose your job.
You're going to lose your job. You're crazy. You're stupid. You're fat. You're ugly. Nobody likes you. You have no friends. You can't keep a job. You're ugly. Any negative thing that you can think of, that's them doing that. And if you believe it, they got you. And they sound just like your thoughts.
Yeah, but I am ugly. I am fat.
Right.
I am not worthy of this marriage. I am not worthy of this girl, this man.
And that's the other thing. They go after marriages. They go after relationships. They love to break up families.
Go and cheat.
And they hate kids. They go after kids. Some of the nastiest battles I've ever seen were between mothers who were schizophrenic, and the voices were telling them to harm their children.
Smack.
You know, the mothers put up one hellacious battle, but sometimes they lose. So then you see on TV, oh, this mother murdered her kid, or this, this couple murdered their kid. There's one on this morning with that.
But just like you said, regular people tend to experience those thoughts too. But if you accept those thoughts,
yes,
step by step, you become schizophrenic.
Right. And they will fish
you have
for...
to stop it.
Well, I wouldn't say you would become schizophrenic, but you would become more maladjusted. You would become more paranoid. You'd become more neurotic.
Yeah, but this is the path to become a schizophrenic.
Not always, but it usually takes a nasty trauma to break the person, But the voices are like fishermen. They'll go. They can go into. They're energetic, so they can go into your mind and they can see every rotten thing you've ever done, and they can throw it in your face over and over again. So that, when you do something bad and you knew you did something bad and you go, well, that was really stupid. I shouldn't have done that. And you go on and on and on. You look at the animal kingdom, a lion chasing a gazelle or a zebra or something. And the lion almost catches it and it gets away. And then after a little while, 5 or 10 minutes, when the lion's gone, it goes back to the way it was. It's not traumatized by that. It just goes back to being a zebra again, People aren't like that. These things get in there and they go, yeah, you did this stupid thing, and now they're thinking this about you and that about you, and now you look stupid. And it's kind of like you got me when I texted you for your telephone number, and you wrote back and said,
We're already
It's on the
texting.
text. You know, I went, well, I lost the CERD designation at that point. I felt so stupid, you know, that they're going, yeah, you're stupid. Yeah, okay, I'm stupid.
No worries. Let's get back through those patterns, please.
Okay, so, you know, they foster and create negative emotion, then they feed off it. The last thing they want these people to know is that they're parasites. They are feeding off of that negative emotion. So they're doing the same thing to people that we're doing to cows. You put them out in the pasture, you let them eat the grass, you let them feed, okay? And then they produce energy, and then we milk them. You isolate them and milk them. The schizophrenics want the voices want the schizophrenics isolated. They want them by themselves in a room by themselves, and they will make them do things to the parents where the parents get fed up with them and go, get in your room and stay there. That's the worst thing that could happen, because now you're letting those voices have 100% access to that person. Okay? So they energetically drain their victims, and boy, they hate you notifying the patient about that. Okay, when I was working psych crisis in the emergency rooms all over Tucson, they didn't want us working with these patients. They wanted us getting them out of the ER. Send them home, send them to a mental health center, send them to the cops, just get them out of the ER or admit them to the hospital. Right? They didn't want us spending time working with these guys. So I knew more about the voices than any of the other people working there. So I was able to size them up better, quicker. Right? So I had a little bit of extra time. And I was wondering, what can I tell these people that would help them the most that I would be willing to risk? Because if they went and told psychiatry what I told them, then I'd be in trouble with the goddamn psychiatrists again. They've been my what do you call it? My ball and chain my entire career, you know. So I tell them, first of all, they had to know that these voices aren't who they are. They're separate. You know, they're not you. And secondly is that they're parasites. And when I would tell the patient that they were parasites, they would noticeably get more anxious and angry, you know. And there was one gal I remember, she had actually killed somebody and nobody found out. But it was interesting. She came in from the regular emergency room, and when I went to evaluate her, she said, there's more demons in that emergency room than I've ever seen anywhere in one place in my life. And I went, that's interesting. I said, well, what did you see there? You know, most people would have blown it off. They go, yeah, well, yeah. And I said, what'd you see? She said, I watched this doctor giving a patient a diagnosis. And she said, I saw black toads come out of his mouth and move toward that patient. And she said, if that patient believed what he was saying, she would get that disease and she would die. And I went, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I found her very interesting. The ones I found interesting, I spent a lot more time with. So it turned out that she had been molested as a child, you know, repeatedly. So that was her trauma. She had admitted herself voluntarily, but there wasn't anybody to evaluate her until I came on shift, and she was threatening to leave. So the psych nurse said, you need to get on her quick because she's voluntary and she's threatening to leave. You know, we need to know what's going on with her. So she's telling me this story, and she told me she was repeatedly raped as a child, and she said the same thing happened to my daughter. Okay, and I said, well, how'd you feel about it? And do you know who did it? And she goes, yeah, I know who did it. And she had this sly look on her face. I said, well, did he get caught? What happened to him? And she said, well, he's no longer with us. And she had this big smile on her face, like
That's okay.
she'd killed the guy, but she wasn't going to come out and say it, you know. So at one point I was talking to her, telling her about the voices. She agreed. She knew they weren't her. But then I told her they were parasites. Well, before I told her that, I said, I'm going to tell you something. And I said, when's the last time you heard the voices? She said, about 20 minutes ago. I said, I'm going to tell you something in about 30 seconds, and the voices are going to go nuts. I said, if you need to leave, just go. I'm not going to block you. I'm not going to stop you. I said, don't try to leave the hospital, because if you try to go out of the emergency room, they're going to call the cops on you, and it's going to be worse for you. You just go out there and blow off some steam and whatever if you need to, you know. So I told her, I said, those voices are sucking off you. They're parasites. And they went nuts. She jumped up and she was antsy, and she rushed out of that room and ran around the day room and tried to get into the bathroom, just acting totally out of control. And the psych nurse comes up to me and she goes, what'd you tell her? I said, she'll be okay. Just let her calm down. I said, she'll be okay in a few minutes. She did. And she came back and we finished up the interview. But the voices hate the person knowing that they're parasites, that they're feeding off them, that they're taking their life energy. That's the last thing they want them to know. So anybody who's listening, who's a therapist, if you think you're going to tell somebody that, you better have somebody there with you. Don't do it by
Works for 100% every time.
Virtually. They don't like it. They act up.
Because they got identified.
Yeah. Well, they're identified as parasites.
Right.
See, if you had a big leech on you, you know, and you saw it, and somebody told you that thing's a leech and it's sucking your blood, would you leave it there? That's right. And that's what the person does when they realize that their energy goes every time these things attack them. They'd see the energy leaves. You tell them, well, where do you think your energy went? Every time these voices come, your energy goes to nothing. Who do you think's taking it? You've heard them billions of times, and every time your energy drops to nothing. Where do you think it's going? You know, even with that, a lot of them will go, I don't know. And then you tell them, and that's when that's when it hits the fan. So more of these patterns, they get louder after sunset. Okay, they get louder when they're ignored. So the psychiatrist would tell them, they're just hallucinations. Just ignore them. You know, just forget about them. I remember being in a psychiatrist's office at the state hospital when that happened. I pulled that patient in and, a week later, and I said, remember me? I was with you when the doctor so-and-so told you just to ignore the voices. I said, well, how'd that go for you? He said, it didn't go well. You know, so I would start asking these guys, what happens when you ignore them? Every single one of them said they got louder. Yeah, they will not be ignored. They won't let the person ignore them. And when they start getting weaker, the person can ignore them. But when they're strong, they're very difficult to ignore.
Okay.
Yeah. They foster self-destructive behavior. They're always telling the patient to do stuff that's against their best interest. You know, punch this guy, or sabotage this guy, or destroy this guy's car, or do something that's going to get them in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Consistently negative. They foster isolation. They destroy relationships. They destroy marriages. They want the person being isolated, alone, by themselves, listening to them all day. You know, so the worst thing you could do is allow them to isolate themselves. Keep them busy doing something, some positive game, and watch what they're playing, because they'll gravitate right to these murder games, these violent video games. Those should be outlawed. They're outlawed in Japan. They should be outlawed.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
They demand the victim's attention. They won't let them alone. They consistently maneuver for increased control over the victim. You know, they're constantly chipping away at that victim's control. They're slowly taking it over. Gaslight. They do a good job of gaslighting. I remember one psych patient. He was on heavy drugs. He was still hearing the voices, and he was a musician. And the voices told him he murdered somebody. And he was so messed up, he didn't know whether he did or not. So he was in this dilemma. Like he went, should I go turn myself into the police? And he went, well, if I turn myself into the police and I didn't murder anybody, they would lock me in a psych ward. Okay? Mm-hmm. If I did murder somebody, they'll lock me in prison. Mm-hmm. Okay? So what the voices were doing is every time that they heard a siren, the police or ambulance or something
coming
like that, right away it'd be, there they come. They're looking for you. They're right around the corner. You better go hide somewhere. You know,
Even though he did nothing.
even though he did nothing.
It's just a thought, intrusive thought that
yeah.
you were a killer.
Yep. And he didn't know whether it was true or not. Because I would ask these guys, I go, you know they're liars, don't you? And they go, most of them will go, yeah, I know they're liars. And then I said, well, then why do you believe them? And the answer I got is because they're so damn believable. That's the answer a number of them gave me. You know, so That's a Lie program. I've got a program on my website on the first page at jerrymarzinski.com. It's called the That's a Lie program. It'll help greatly with obsessive compulsive thoughts. My co-author, Sherry Sweeney, came up with it. She was hearing voices when she was younger. Okay, they almost killed her. So when I met her, she was the most spiritual person I ever saw, and we were working together on prison reform. Okay, and I got to know her really well, and it was 10 years before she told me she was hearing voices. Is one day I was telling her something that happened at the hospital, and said that, well, these voices were doing that. And she goes, I know all about that stuff. And I said, you what? You know? She goes, yeah, I heard them when I was young. They almost killed me. She didn't tell me that for 10 years. So that tells you how much of a stigma there is to this. You know, don't tell anybody. And they're operating in secret the whole time, destroying the person because nobody's aware of them. Okay? Not even the person who has them is aware of them a lot of times. So she's an engineer, and she came up with this That's a Lie program. It's got like 4 sections on the first page of my website. It will sometimes get rid of the voices, but it will weaken them if you use it. It's totally free. You know, at jerrymarzinski.com. Just go there and print it out and put it to use. It works with normal people, works with obsessive compulsive people. It helps fight those compulsive thoughts, you know, that run through your head. Okay, so they manipulate perception. The schizophrenic could be walking down the street and some guy cracks a joke on the other side of the street. The voices are telling them they're laughing at you. They're mocking you. They're making fun of you.
Go do something?
Yeah, go do something. You know? That kind of stuff. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory because they're energetic. They can go, your thoughts are energy, your spirit's energy, your feelings are energy, everything about you is energy. You're an energetic being. They're energy too. They can go in there, they can pull up every negative thing you ever did and throw it in your face to get you to create that negative energy that they feed off of. All right? They demand the victim not tell anybody about them. You know, they warn the victim not to speak about them, not to tell anybody. And if they do, they get shunned, they get locked up, they get thrown in front of a psychiatrist. There's no benefit to a schizophrenic telling anybody about their voices. It always results in something bad. Either they end up being drugged to death, they end up being locked up, they end up being isolated, their friends leave them. There's no practical benefit for them to speak to anyone. And on top of that, the voices are telling them, if you tell them about us, this bad stuff is going to happen to you. You know?
You're going to get punished. Okay.
Yeah. So, what I found was interesting was there was a guy back in the 1920s. I think he was a psychiatrist. His wife was a psychic. And what would happen, he would administer schizophrenics a electric shock. It was a static shock, you know. And the voices would leave temporarily. And then the wife, who was a psychic, would pick up on them and talk them away from the patient. And they were being cured. 100% cure, you know.
Do you believe that?
Yeah. Now, what I saw was that at the state hospital where these people were being ECT, they called it electroconvulsive therapy. You know, I watched one of these. It was horrific. There's, I lost my train of thought here. We're going through these things. Let me tell you this story because they're still doing this today. The ECT, they run electricity through your brain, okay? So I had a friend who's a psych working on another unit. He says, hey, our psychiatrist is doing a demonstration on the ECT for these psych students. You want to come and watch?
Does a patient have to sign an agreement for him to do that?
No, you don't need an agreement. We were all staff.
No, the patient that gets ECT, does he have to agree for that treatment, or it's
this lady? She was so pathetic. I suspect they didn't have. I suspect they didn't need permission because they were using it to punish people. Okay, so in this case, it was this little old lady. So I showed up there, and here's this. I think he was a Cuban psychiatrist, but he was like the showboat. He was like the master in a circus. And here's all these students circled him. Here's this ECT machine, this electroconvulsive therapy machine, and he's explaining to them this machine and what's going to happen. So what they do is they put these electrodes this big on each side of the patient's head, and then they shoot electricity through their brain. So they electrocute their brain. All right. So I'm watching this, and he gets these electrodes, and he smears this jelly on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, why are you doing that? He goes, well, if we don't put that jelly on them, the electricity would burn them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here comes the patient, and two nurses on each side, and she's this little shriveled up old lady, just frail little lady. And they're bringing her in, and she jumps up on that. She doesn't jump, but she gets up on this gurney, like she's done this a bunch of times before. And she lays down, and they strap her down with these big, giant pads. They're leather pads. They strap her wrists down. They strap her arms down. They strap her legs down. They strap her chest down. She's just completely strapped down, immobile, can't move. And I asked the psychiatrist, well, why are you doing that? He said, well, if we didn't do that when we shocked her, she'd just jump up and go all over the place. She'd be convulsing. And I went, okay. And they got her strapped down, and then he gets this big needle. It's like this big, and it's like a horse needle. And he gets this milky white fluid, and he fills it with that, and he sticks it in this little lady's arm. And instead of just pushing in the white fluid, he up and down. So he's drawing blood in there, mixing the blood with this white fluid, and then he pushes it all in there. And it's giant.
What's that fluid?
It was some kind of tranquilizer. It was a muscle relaxant. And I asked him, I said, well, what is that? And he says, well, it's a muscle relaxant. If we didn't give her that, she would break her bones when she was convulsing. And I'm like, this is a psychiatric therapy that breaks bones?
And burns people?
And yeah. So if they didn't strap them down, they would actually break their bones while they're convulsing. So the head was strapped down, the body, everything was strapped down tight. So I'm like watching all this, and it's like, what do you call it? Frankenstein's lab. It's just really weird. And this guy's like a showboat man. He's like getting off on all these students listening to him. Like he's the grand master of the shock machine. And then he tells everybody to step back from the gurney. Get back. I'm about to set the shock. And he dials some things on this wooden box about this big with some dials on it. And then he goes, okay, 1, 2, 3, and he flips the switch. And she just starts convulsing all over the place. I mean, I thought she was just going to break through those straps. And she's this little weak woman. And it seemed to go on forever. I mean, it's like, how long is he going to do this? I mean, I'm like, holy, it's like, I was just like, whoa. Finally, he shuts that thing down, and she just, boom, collapses. And I'm just looking at her like shocked, and she's turning blue. She's dying. Her face is turning blue, cyanotic. And this guy's still rattling on. And I'm like, doctor, she's cyanotic. you know, and he goes, like an afterthought, he goes, oh, and he gets these shocker things that you put on your chest and shocks her, and she jumps, and then she starts breathing again. So she was on her way out, you know. After that, I turned around and I almost fainted. I mean, I got a pretty strong stomach, but I had to hang on to the pillar.
And this is treatment.
Yep. They were doing 3,000 of these things a year at the state hospital.
In one hospital?
One hospital.
3,000 a year, so
3,000 of these
10 a day.
ECTs.
10 a day.
No, well, I don't know how many a day, but 3,000 a year.
If you divide it, so 365, almost 10 a year. What year was that?
And this was in the 70s.
This is when you saw it?
Yes.
Do they do it still?
They're still doing it today, but it's not as bad. You know,
Does it help? Do they have the records that it helps?
Temporarily. It'll help the depression a lot of times temporarily. You know, maybe a week or two. But the guy doesn't remember anything. You know, their memory gets blasted out, and they're like that for a while. But one thing I found was interesting was that the psychotic voices, after one of those treatments, being shocked like that, would disappear for a week or two before they came back. So that lends evidence to what this other psychiatrist was doing with the shocks. Okay? It had some effect on the voices. They don't like the shocks. All right. So I was wondering at one time, like, okay, what could I do to simulate a shock while I was working with the psychotic prisoners at the prison? Well, this was even, because the bad ones, you know, I had to shut up the voices, you know, and if the shock shut up the voices, then I could get to them for a little while, especially in the emergency room. You know, they could shut up the voices up, because the voices don't cooperate with anything. You know, they don't want you to evaluate the person. So I'm thinking for like, like months, like what can I do to create something simulating a shock without getting fired? You know, so it's like 3-4 months, and then one day I walk up and I'm at the at the secretary's desk, and I see this big rubber band, and I go, wow, maybe that'll work. You know, so take the rubber band, and this was while I was working in the prison, and I needed to get this information from the prisoners to see how dangerous they were. Okay, but if the voices were raving in their head, I had to find some way to temporarily shut them up so I could get the information I needed. And I couldn't shock them or do something like that. So I had them put a rubber band on and snap that rubber band really hard. And that shock of the rubber band actually shut the voices up for a few minutes so I could get to them. Okay, they came back, didn't stop them permanently, but it came back. And then I eventually found that what you hold in your mind very vividly actually happens to the voices on the other side, which is strange. You know? So with the ones in the emergency room that were hearing bad voices, I would imagine that duct tape was wrapped around the face of the voice of these entities, and they would actually shut up for long enough for me to get the psych eval done. You know, if you could imagine it very vividly, because this is a whole different world now. You know, this is another dimension. And I remember when I first stepped into this, it's like, you know what? I don't understand this. I mean, I don't have any rules. I don't have any maps. I don't have any. There's nobody wrote about this. There's no information on it. It's like a whole different world. It was like I had one foot in one world and another foot in the other world, and I could talk to the schizophrenics about these things, but I couldn't talk to anybody else about them, especially my colleagues, you know. So they'd think I was totally friggin' nuts. But there was one time where I asked the patient in the emergency room, I imagined that the duct tape was around the mouth of this entity that was And I said, did it shut up? And he goes, no, it didn't shut up. It's going, like it was gagged, But it did work temporarily. So that was very interesting. So these let me rush through these real quick. The voices are consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. You can't trust them with anything. Don't act on what they're telling you. They consistently steer the victim away from anything that might generate joy or peace. They don't want that. They want conflict, they want anger, they want fear, they want guilt. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. You can be sitting there minding your own business, feeling fine, and then all of a sudden you feel this heavy feeling coming over you like depression from nowhere. That's them. They short-circuit reason. They fly in the face of reason. They get these people to do things that are totally unreasonable. Okay? The boredom is bad. If they're bored, that's not good, because if they're bored, they're allowing themselves to be controlled by these things. They need to keep active with something positive. The most dangerous part is that the voices try to pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. If they do that, they got you. You have to understand that those thoughts aren't yours. They don't belong to you.
That's the first step.
Selective forgetting, they'll make the person forget. So I would give some of these people the 23rd Psalm. When the voices come, read the 23rd Psalm. And they would lose them. They would forget to read them. Something would happen to them. By the time they came back the next week, it'd be like, oh, no, I lost that a long time ago. Give me another one. And then when my psych boss, the psychologist boss of mine, when he found out I was handing out those 23rd Psalms, he ordered me to stop right away. Don't do it.
Have you ever thought that he might be possessed too?
Oh, yeah. Especially when these guys started. There were several of them at the prison. It took like 6 months or 3/4 of a year, but we got rid of the voices. Okay? And I was so interested in these guys. Sometimes I'd spend up to 4 hours with one guy talking to him about his voices. And then when they started fully recovering, that's when I got into trouble, because they had him on these psychiatric meds, and they'd go to the psychiatrist who needed to re-up their meds. And the ones who I'd been working with who recovered, they would tell the psychiatrist, well, I don't need those meds anymore. I'm okay. In the psychiatrist's mind, that's impossible. That doesn't happen. In their minds, it's like once you're schizophrenic, that's who you are for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So here was one after another, not many, maybe one every 6 months or every few months, would completely recover. Voice is gone. Okay, and it came to the attention of my boss, the one who told me not to give out the 23rd Psalm. And they started asking me, what are you doing with these people in there? You're spending lots of time in there. I said, well, yeah, I'm getting my work done. I got everything done you asked me to. Mm-hmm. What's the problem? I'm interested in talking to these people. Well, what are you doing in there? Well, I'm doing, I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them, And so they were like, they were agitated because these people were recovering. And I'm going, well, why? You don't have to spend all that money on these toxic psychiatric medications. They're very expensive. If they're recovering, you should be happy. They're normal again, And they weren't. They were pacing around like demons, demanding to know what I was doing in there. So they started pulling up some of these schizophrenics I worked with who had completely recovered. And one of them, they had a MMPI on him when he went into the prison, which is the psychology's gold standard test. And that test showed that he was psychotic when he came into the prison. It was a valid profile. None of these prisoners, and this was the biggest compliment I've ever got, here's all these ex-psychotic prisoners who wouldn't tell them anything about what we were doing in my office. They knew what they were up to. So they wouldn't tell them anything. And that got them even more frustrated, you know. So this one guy who had this MNPI, the investigator guy who came to talk to him, asked him, what are you doing in his office? What are you guys doing there? He said, he's helping us, not like you, asshole. And that did it, man. He could have gone all day without that. That infuriated this guy. So he said, hey, I got a valid MMPI for when you came into prison. Would you be willing to take another one? And the guy said, yeah, sure, I'll take another one. So he took it. It scored up as a valid profile, and it came out that this guy was no longer psychotic. They went nuts. They went absolutely nuts. You should have seen them. They were like a couple of demons pacing back and forth. Like, we got to stop this. He's doing something illegal. He's doing something immoral. I mean, he's doing something that we didn't approve of. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. They went after me like friggin' ducks on a June bug, you know. And it was, then they did this inquisition. I had to go up to the, it was interesting. They arranged this thing. It was like an inquisition. They had the medical director for the prison that we were there, who I knew the guy. He was we got along okay. He was an okay guy. And then they had the psychologist and this other psychologist, and you know, they were all together in this big, and I knew it was an inquisition. And it was real strange because all these Christian guys that I knew I didn't even know were Christian. They'd come up and they'd tell me what to do in a situation like that because they'd been there before. You know, they'd say, don't tell them anything you don't have to. Don't say anything you don't have to. Don't answer any questions extensively. All these Christian guys started coming up and giving me all this information. And it was like, you know, thank God, at least, you know, I know a little bit about how to handle this because I'd never been in that kind of trouble before. So they came out of there with nothing, and somehow it got to the medical director that these guys were no longer psychotic. He didn't know how it happened, but he knew that it happened because they had told him, and they were telling him, well, he must be doing something illegal. They had no evidence of that. And then the medical director, after he heard this, he goes, well, if he's saving us medicine, he's saving us money, you know, leave him alone. And then they were furious. They were absolutely furious after that.
Because this is not the economy of this.
Yeah, because they couldn't get me. You know, so these people periodically kept totally getting rid of the voices, completely back to normal again. A year later, after that medical director left, and I had no longer had his protection, man, they went after me like ducks on a June bug. You know, they just made my life miserable. And I was pretty close to retirement, so they had a buyback program then. So I bought back like 3 years of retirement, which is what I needed to retire. And I hit the ejection seat, got out of there, you know, and then started working doing psych crisis evaluations in all the emergency rooms around Tucson.
So now you have this MACE program.
The MACE?
Yeah.
Well, see, it for these guys to recover, it took months. Nothing that I had been taught, none of the extensive in-service training that they demanded. You had to go through all these weeks of in-service training, you know, to keep your license. And it was all this garbage that they would feed you that they thought made a difference. None of it worked. You know, it was like this group of Nazis in Phoenix that would tell you what you had to do. And you had to pay them to keep this license. You know, it didn't certify anything. You know, it was pure garb. But in order to work with Arizona, in the state of Arizona, you had to pay them and re-up this license like every 3 years. Okay? And if you didn't do what they said, if you didn't take the in-service training they wanted you to, then they would drop your license and you couldn't work in this state. And one of the hospitals I was working in, I was working with a state senator who did the same thing I did, you know, when he wasn't in the Senate. And I asked him, I said, what do they do with that license money that they collect from us? Because they weren't using it to help us. You know, if somebody put in a complaint about you, they would investigate you and they would investigate the situation. You know, so it's like, They weren't doing it for our good at all, you know. So I asked him, what do they do with that money? He said they put it into a slush fund and they just use it for whatever they want. It wasn't to improve the state of counseling and so none of this junk that they taught, even in, you know, and I went all the way up, you know, from undergraduate psychology to graduate school and then into the PhD program. And the PhD program was worse than all the rest. I mean, it was like when they say piled higher and deeper, it was higher and deeper. These guys had egos that were incredible. And none of the counseling techniques they were teaching would have worked anyway. They wouldn't have worked either. So by the time I got there, I had spent 7 years at that state hospital. And here I was in this PhD program, and they're teaching me stuff that I know wouldn't have worked. I mean, I knew it. There was no doubt in my mind that isn't going to work with most of these people. It's garbage, you know? And it was just a waste of time. It got to the point where I just got very depressed. So I was always looking for something that would work. You know, what is mental illness? By then I knew what was causing schizophrenia. It was these voices. I couldn't talk to them about that. You know, I couldn't talk to any of the psychiatrists about that. You know, matter of fact, I couldn't talk to any of my colleagues about that because they weren't open to it. You know, psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia have not done any research into those voices at all. They just, we are the psychiatrists, we hereby pronounce that the voices are hallucinations because we said so. They have no evidence at all, none, zero, none. If they take these patterns and they look at these patterns, they'll see that they run specific, repeatable, predictable patterns. They can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations don't do that. Mm-hmm. They're on my website at jerrymarzinski.com under articles. Anybody can access them, okay? So I knew what these things were. I knew basically how to fight against them, but there was no other therapy that I knew of that worked with anything in any viable form. You know, you could sit there and tell somebody your sad story for over and over and over again. Oh yeah, this happened to me and this happened, and go to another therapist and this happened to me, and it doesn't help any. You know, you're just kind of re-sabotaging yourself or re-traumatizing yourself every time. It doesn't work. You know, then one day I have this guy write me. Then I got a lot of emails from a lot of people when I started coming out about this, but I had to drop my license. I had to just totally drop it because they would have went after me. I would have lost it. They would have dirtied it up. But this guy, we took this guy's license for some bull crap. I knew it would have happened. No doubt in my mind it would have happened. And then I would have had a dirty license. Now it's clean. I left with a clean slate. You know. So nothing was working. None of the therapies that I was taught in all those years of college worked. Then this fellow wrote me, and he said, I got somebody you need to meet. And he said, I didn't know this guy from Adam. He just came out of nowhere. And he says, at the very worst, she would just be a jolly old lady. And I went, that's an odd one. You know, that one got my answer because it wasn't like the normal ones I got. You know, I usually get. It's like, you know, my son is doing this and he's about to take off to California to become a movie star and he's hearing voices, and, you know, this kind of stuff there I can't really do much about. But he said, she's just a jolly old lady. And so I read a little bit about Mace. And after I finished the first book, I said, this guy's on to something. You know, Mace was a captain. He was a ship captain. He drove these big freighters back and forth across the ocean. So he wasn't a psychiatrist. He wasn't a psychologist, wasn't a social worker. He's coming in like Donald Trump from the outside. You know, he's not affected. He's not brainwashed by any of these guys with the big pharma or the institutions, or no. He's coming in with a fresh perspective on what the mind is. And he found that the mind isn't what we're told it is. It takes pictures of wherever you put your attention. So you put your attention wherever, and it takes a picture. So, these guys on LSD that see the trails, they move their hand across that, and they see a boom, 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 boom. The mind actually taking pictures. Boom, 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 boom. And he said that what we think is the mind is actually the spirit. It's the spirit that sees. It's the spirit that hears. It's the spirit that feels. It's the spirit that thinks. It's not the mind, because it's the mind just takes pictures, So, and it can take pictures of non-physical things. All right? It can take pictures of emotions. It can take pictures of traumas. It can take pictures of feelings. Okay? And what he found was that these pictures get kind of fossilized as a negative identity. Okay? So something really bad happens to you, and there's a really bad trauma. Okay? And what happens during a trauma is that you got a really bad feeling and it just doesn't go away. It just stays there forever. Now, the other thing that happens during a trauma is that you make a decision during that trauma as to what part you played in that trauma and who you are as a result of it. And you don't make good decisions when you're in the middle of a friggin' nasty trauma. It's always a bad decision. Okay? So what happens eventually when that bad feeling doesn't go away, the ego shows up and goes, okay, you're not doing good with this. Let me handle it. And it takes that bad feeling and that decision and it throws it into your subconscious mind and it locks it down. It's not dead. It's still alive, but it's not in your face all the time going, yeah, well, this horrible thing happened. Blah, blah, blah. Now it's like a landmine. It's sitting there waiting to be triggered, usually by somebody like the person who caused the trauma in the first place. So it's sitting there waiting. It's not in your face all the time. When somebody shows up who's similar to the person who caused that trauma, that thing blows. It goes off, and it tells the person, hey, that guy's a little bit too close to the person who did that to you in the first place. You need to either attack them or run from them or avoid them, But it causes an upset, a big upset. And, that causes problems. So that garbage gets projected onto somebody else. And the ego is saying, it's them. You can see them. You can feel them. You can sense them. They're bad. And sometimes the person doesn't even have to open his mouth. Somebody walks in the room and you just go, yeah, that guy's a creep. You just feel it. So that's a negative identity. Okay? So it sits up there, and it doesn't just stay silent. It's affecting you all the time. It affects what you think, what you feel, what you do, what you don't do, your who you deal with. It's constantly messing you up. And every time it goes off, it gets stronger. So what people do is after it goes off enough times, they just go, well, that's just who I am. I just don't like these kind of people. That's all there is to it. Every time I get near somebody like that, it upsets me. So I'm just going to stay away from them. They're dirtbags. I don't want anything to do with them. Okay? It's not them. It's that thing in your subconscious mind. So they call that a negative identity. Okay? So there's two kinds of identities. There's positive identities and there's negative identities. You have a positive identity as a podcaster. You have a positive identity as a car driver. All these. You need an identity to get things done. Okay. Negative identities cause problems. Okay. So what happens is that stuff gets frozen in there, and all the feelings that go with it get frozen in there. And MACE only works because there's a spiritual component to it. Without that spiritual component, it would be just as bad and just as worthless as all these other therapies. It's the only therapy I've seen that has a spiritual component. Right? So what MACE found was that the mind can take pictures of emotions. It can take pictures of feelings. And if you hook that picture with all the feelings to the spirit will take that negative energy and transpose it. It doesn't destroy it. It takes it and turns it into positive energy, okay, that the person can now use.
Mm-hmm.
All right? But it's the spirit that does that. It's not the therapist. Okay? The therapist just makes the connection. Okay? So once that connection is made, and you put all the emotions in there, like you might go, the person said, this happened to me and these are all the feelings I have about it. Okay? You'd say, okay, let's put down all those feelings. All right? So you take all those feelings and you have them turn it into a picture, an image. Okay? Because emotions they're very ephemeral. You know, you can't see them, you can't touch them, you can't hit them, you can't remove them, you can't vacuum them up. You can't do it. They're ephemeral. They're like psychiatry's worst nightmare. You know, they can drug them, you know, but they're very ephemeral. So if you turn them into an image, and then you put all those feelings into that image, you can then connect that image with the spirit, and the spirit will take that energy and drain it. Okay? So when the person's done, you say, okay, the image is gone, you know, and once it's gone, you ask them, okay, let's go back to that. I was working yesterday with a police officer in Australia who had been traumatized by going into a house where somebody had committed suicide months ago. The house was full of flies, the body was decomposed, and he was totally traumatized. And the image of that body had been plaguing him for years. And it just wouldn't go away. Okay? After we got all those feelings associated with that thing, and this created that image, I'd take him back and go, okay, let's go back to that house where you went in and saw that body. How are you feeling about it now? And he goes, okay, much more neutral. You know, I said, are you feeling the shock that you felt back then? He goes, no, it's gone. You know, you're feeling the sadness. And he goes, no more than normal for somebody who would have killed themselves.
So Jerry, you can help people that are schizophrenic and have trauma too.
Yes.
Also these people?
So what happens, schizophrenics are, there's a number of us, there's a small group of us that are all MACE practitioners that are working with schizophrenics because we're interested in seeing how far MACE can be pushed with them. So far we got probably a 15 to 20% recovery rate, which isn't high, you know, compared to that 15% success rate isn't high, but it's much higher than psychiatry.
Psychiatry success rate is what?
0. Absolutely 0.
Absolutely 0?
Yeah, virtually absolutely 0. Even if the voices seldom go away, even on those medications, they're still there. They're not as strong, but they're still there. They don't have the kind of power and control that they have. But you go off those meds, even with people who don't hear the meds anymore, they go off those meds, those voices come back. You know, there's very few people that fully recover. The people we work with, those voices are gone.
15 to 20%.
Yeah. And even the ones who don't get rid of the voices, we can get rid of the trauma, which is a food that they feed off of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So once they don't have that trauma to stir up all the time, their food source is greatly diminished.
How much time does it take?
An hour.
An hour?
An hour. That's how quick it is. That's how
One session?
1 hour, yeah. Yeah, you can get rid of a major trauma in an hour. That's how fast it is. And I've never seen anything like it.
What's the success rate of getting rid of trauma?
Almost 100%. It's very high. I'd say at least in the 90s.
How can people reach out to you? JerryMarzinski.com.
Yeah, they can go to jerrymarzinski.com. They can give me on my email address, which is JamarZ1, the number 1 at outlook.com. And there's information about Mace on my website
I'm
also.
going to put the links in the description below.
Yeah, they're on that biography I sent you.
Jerry, so the last question on the podcast is always the same. Let's have 2 assumptions with you. Assumption number 1 is the President of the United States is the most powerful human being on planet Earth. Assumption number 2 is you become one. You become the President of the US. Once you do so, you have all those secret agencies, 3-letter agencies at your disposal. They come to you and say, congratulations, Jerry, you're the President now. We, as the agency, we know all the answers in the world. You ask us a question, we give you an honest answer. We're going to tell you the truth. What would be your first question?
What would be my first question? You know what? I'm not sure, because I know there's demons. I know there's devils. I know there's a God. I know there's Jesus. I know there's a spirit. Yeah, I know that a lot of these politicians are full of demons. You know, and I'm watching what's happening. All this evil's being exposed. It's all being exposed. It's coming out like never before.
I agree.
It has to be exposed before we can do anything about it. You know, I know why they're not doing anything about it, because they're all implicated in it. I would probably be, you know, how can I get closer to God? I think that would be it.
You as a president, would you expose the truth to the public? Let's say if we have evidence of those beings being demons, or you name it, would you expose it to the public that these are real?
I don't think so.
Why?
Because of the reaction I got when I exposed it to my colleagues who were supposed to be the experts.
Yeah, but maybe we are in the situation we're in right now because people keep silent.
I'm not keeping silent. I got videos out all over the place.
Yeah, but we assume you become the president and you're the number one voice
I don't think
in
a president would, you know, I think people are starting to get ready for that. You know, they're starting to, from the response I got, there's a lot of people who write me, but the majority of the population isn't there yet. You look what's happening in churches. You know, they're preaching God, Jesus, the 10 Commandments. They're not talking like Brian. They're not talking about the demons and what they do and how they operate and how they affect you and what they're doing to society and how they work in your mind. They're not talking about any of that. Matter of fact, a lot of churches don't want anything to do with that. It's not Jesus that's causing the problems.
Of course not.
It's these things, and people aren't talking about it. And the people that do, you talk to this about a psychiatrist, he can tell you you're nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, matter of fact, that one that got me in trouble, ordering me not, that happened twice. And I've been hiding from psychiatrists my entire career. There's only one that I can talk to about this stuff, and Andrew Kaufman in New York.
He believes you?
Yeah, he knows about this stuff. We did a seminar together in, where was it? Somewhere in northern Arizona. So there's very few psychiatrists who are aware of this. Every once in a while, you know who I get is the nurses, you know, psychiatric nurses. A lot of them are waking up to it. You got social workers that are waking up to it. But not psychiatrists. You know, I got some psychologists that said, "Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. I can see it." But people aren't ready for it.
But the Great Awakening is upon us.
Well,
The Great Awakening.
yeah, the Great Awakening. So I'm doing my part.
Jerry, God bless you. God bless you for everything that you've done and everything that you're going to do. Especially, I believe this podcast will open a lot of eyes, and a lot of people are going to realize that maybe I have those voices that are talking to me. I don't feel schizophrenic. I know I'm not psychotic. I know I'm not nuts,
Right.
but someone is
Something is
talking to
putting
me.
these thoughts in
Yeah.
my head. They are not my thoughts.
And from time to time, they're nasty. They're not
Oh,
good.
yeah, they're never any good. You know, they are always creating disturbance and negativity, and you know, they're evil. They hate the human race. They especially hate kids. They hate kids. Matter of fact, I had one schizophrenic told me he went to TikTok, and he recorded babies laughing. He said that agonized the voices. They couldn't stand it. I found that's unique.
Joy in a kid.
Yes. Yeah. I think they hate kids because they're so innocent.
Open-minded, maybe.
They're innocent.
Can they corrupt kids from the very childhood?
Yeah. Yeah. Matter of fact, here's what they're doing to kids. Psychiatric drug statistics. This is from 2017. Let me make sure we have it. Okay. Got kids that are being drugged by psychiatrists. It said and these are old stats. It's a lot worse now. And more than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs. These same drugs I read you the side effects to, that destroy your central nervous system. Over 622,000 are under the age of 5.
5 years.
5. So that tells you something about the morals of these people that are dishing out these drugs. It's money, 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 money.
When you're 5, you think you're a Spider-Man.
Under 5. 80,000 of them, over 80,000 are on ADHD drugs. And that's back in 2017. A lot more now. Over 38,000 are on antidepressants. Okay?
A kid can be depressed?
Yeah. And over 85,000 are on antipsychotics. Those are the ones that destroy your central nervous system. They're putting kids on these on massive number of kids. There's no morality to these people at all. Over 389,000 were on anti-anxiety drugs, most of which are addictive. All right. Now these ADHD drugs, Adderall, Ritalin, Atarax, they're all amphetamines. And I've talked to a number of prisoners in prison who were ADHD and were put on Adderall, Atarax, and they moved from there onto street amphetamines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I asked them, why'd you do that? You're feeling good on the ADHD, on the Ritalin. They went, well, I just wanted a better high. And that, what was interesting with these prisoners who were on meth, when they ran out, the voices would tell them where to go and when to be there to go get more meth. And so a complete stranger would show up with the meth.
Really?
Oh, that's the God, I heard that more than once. They would, the voices would tell them what houses to rob and when to go in there.
So nobody's there?
So nobody's there. Or they would tell them, one guy was telling me that they would tell him which houses to rob, and if the person got up and were awakened by them getting in, the voices would tell him when to get out. Okay? And he said there was one time where he was robbing a house, the person got up, and the voices said, they're up, get out of here. So he jumps out the window and goes running down, tries to run to this alley to the left. And the voices said, don't go there, the cops are coming up that alley. Go down the right alley. They ran down there, and the voices said, jump into that dumpster over there. So he jumps into the dumpster, and he's waiting there, and a cop comes by with a flashlight, and he passes by, and he's only like 15 feet away, and the voices are saying, okay, get out now and run. And the guy went, they're too close. I mean, it's too close. I can't get out now. So he gets out, he runs, and he goes back to his apartment. And he's sitting there, and the voices are going, good job, good job. He goes, no, not too good a job. I left all the loot in the garbage can. They said, don't worry about it. You can go there in the morning and get it.
Yeah, but you only believe that because that nuts person told you. Maybe that's not even true.
But
There's a chance.
I've heard it from so many others where the voices told them, what to do, where to go, when to be to get the. Here's a classic one. This guy recovered. By the time he told me this story, the voices were gone. He's one of the prisoners I worked with who fully recovered. And what was interesting is while I was working with him, he was also hearing his mother, who was deceased. And I was very suspicious of that because the voices can play like anybody. You know, they can take the place of anybody. They even though they sound like your voices, they know things that person would know. Okay. So he told me, and this is after he recovered, he told me so he was in San Diego and he had a rap sheet like 3 pages long. He was in trouble with the cops forever, you know, and he was using all kinds of drugs. And he said one day the voices told him, he said, we know where there's a marijuana sesamolia pot field in Oregon. They said, take your $250, go get 2 burlap bags and a machete, and we'll show you where it is. And he goes, all right, you know. So he does that, and he drives up to Oregon, following their directions at every step of the way like a GPS. And finally he comes to this end of this dirt road. He drives down like 23 miles of dirt road, dead ends at this mountain. He stops the car and he goes, okay, what now? I mean, I can't drive over the mountain. They go, there's a hiking trail to your left, about 30 yards off. You just go over there and you'll find it. Take your burlap bags and your machete. So he gets out and he finds the hiking trail. He hikes up it for 2-3 hours and he sees this massive sesamolia pot field. Okay? And he's like, wow. So he fills up his 2 burlap sacks and he goes to the voices. He goes, okay, what now? They said, well, there's a national park right near here where you can sell it. So they tell him where to go sell it. He goes there, he starts selling this, and he's making tons of money. He bought all the prostitutes he could handle. He bought all the drugs he could handle, all the alcohol he could handle. And what threw me for a loop, he said the voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. And I said, come on, man, you're pulling my leg down. This is too much. You know, your story's already fantastic.
Literally fishing.
Fishing, like fish.
Okay.
You know, and I'm like, hey, what, good time, you're pulling my, no, he goes, honest to God, I'm not pulling your leg. So he said he went and bought a fishing rod and he went out to the Columbia River and he said he was the only one catching any fish. The voices were telling him where to throw the hook, when to bring it back, and when to move on. He said he was the only one catching fish all that day. And I was like, you know, this is on the edge of my belief system, you know. And he goes, honest to God, I'm honest to God. So, you know, we kept working with the guy. And what was the end of that part of the story was, like the 3rd time he went to go up there, he ran out of money. And he was having the time of Riley. I mean, all this stuff he was doing was hurting him or somebody else. I mean, it was all bad stuff. But he ran out and he says, I got to go up and get some more pot. And the voices told him, they're waiting for you. You go up there again, they're going to kill you. They know you've been robbing them. Take all your money, turn around and go back to San Diego. So he did that. You know, he swears this was the truth. Now, the mother thing, after he recovered, I kept touch with him, you know, for a while, making sure the voices were gone. And his mother kept showing up, you know, and I kept asking him about his mother. And this was one of their tricks. They were transferring me to a Spanish-speaking unit, and my Spanish is horrible. So they were doing that so I couldn't keep helping these guys, all right? But before I left, I checked on this guy. And then I said, you know, how's your mother? And then one day he comes up and he says, my mother wants to talk to you. And I said, well, what's she got to say? And in my office, he said, she thanks you for helping me. And I said, well, no problem. I said, what are you doing up there? She said, I'm checking people in. And then I went to ask her another question, and she said, I shouldn't be talking to you. Everything you need to know is in the Bible. But the last story I want to tell you is all these patterns. Okay, here they are in front of me. I'm seeing them over and over and over again. And I start thinking, this is while I'm in the prison, what would happen if I started messing with these patterns? What if I started messing them up so the voices were being interfered with? And they would get furious, and I figured whatever made them furious was good. In the prison, it wasn't a problem. You had all these guards. The prison was set up for violent behavior. If one of these guys went off, if I didn't get hurt, the guards would take care of it. So it was set up for violence. If one of these guys that I had in my group went and told the warden, hey, he's asking us about these voices we didn't like, they'd go, get out of here, go play in the traffic. I mean, they got better things to do than listen to your nonsense. So what happened is they started coming back eventually saying the voices are getting pissed off, one after another after another. The voices are getting pissed off. They don't like us coming here. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like us doing the homework you want us to do. None of them quit. They all kept coming. And a lot of them were just as curious about the voices as I was. So I had to deal with them. Hey, I'll work with you on this. I'll do everything I know. I'll help you out the best I can. But you got to tell me in real time what the voices are telling you when we're in session. So that's why I'd spend 4 hours in session with some of these guys, talking to them and the voices. The voices were rotten. They just rotten the pigs or slime. They're nasty things. And so all of them started coming back saying the voices don't like what you're doing. They don't like us doing this. They don't want us coming here. They scream when we come over here. They're telling us to go back to bed. So I didn't quit. And then what was the next one that happened? Oh, yeah. There was a South American shaman who wrote a book, The Voice of Knowledge, by Miguel Ruiz. And he wrote talking about these voices, these kind of things. And there was a whole section, he had a paragraph on them being parasites, that they're sucking people's energy. And I was working with one guy for a long time. His voices were getting weaker, but he was still hearing them. So I brought that book into the prison, and I brought him into my office. And I asked him, I read that, I said, I'm going to read you a paragraph. I'd like your opinion on this. Because I was always asking him questions. What are the voices doing now? How are they reacting to this? What are they saying now? What did they do when you did this? I mean, constant. I was always asking him questions. So I said, I'm going to read this to you. I'd like your opinion on it. I started reading it. And let me say, what happened before that? I think that was the next thing. No, one thing before that. One guy came in, and he I don't know how I got into the medical unit, but he got in. I didn't send him a pass. He knocks on my door, and I open the door, and I'm like, what do you do? How'd you get in here? I didn't send you a pass. He said, the voices want to talk to you. And I said, they want to talk to me personally? He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. That had never happened before. Yeah. In all the years that I've been messing with the voices, I'd never been addressed personally by them. It was always the patient would tell me what they're saying, and I would say, tell them to go stick their head in the toilet. It would be, stuff like that, back and forth, like the patient was a translator. But he comes in, he goes, they want to talk to you personally. And I'm like, okay, come on in. Sat him down, and I said, what do they have to say? And this came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm like, boom. Because up until that time, I wasn't completely sure that these things were entities. I was still thinking they're some figment of their subconscious or something like that.
But that moment
That moment I knew. It was like anybody else who had as much evidence as I had by then, I'm sure would have come to the conclusion a year or two before I did. But I just kept denying. And my denial system just kept getting weaker and weaker till it was just hanging by fragments. And that's what broke it. And then I asked him, I said, tell them this or something like that. He says, I don't have to tell them anything. They can see you. They can hear you. And I'm like, this is getting weirder by the second, because I never thought about that before. I thought that they were blind or something, you know, that they somehow would just listen in or something. But when he said they can hear you, they can see you, they can see everything you're doing, they can hear everything you're telling me, you know, and it was like, whoa, you know. So that kind of weirded me out. I mean, after he left, I just sat there staring out the window the rest of the day, you know. Then a few weeks later, I don't know whether it was this guy or another guy, but I come in with that Miguel Ruiz book talking about them being parasites. Okay, so I asked this guy. I asked him. I said, "Oh, I'm going to read this paragraph to you about these things. I want your opinion on it." So I started reading, and it started talking about these voices being parasites. And I finished reading, and I look over at him, and he's just sitting there like a zombie. He's just like, you know, just staring at me. Then no expression, just like a zombie, you know. And then I'm like, what's going on with him? You know, because there's a big difference. And then all of a sudden this loud electrical crackle erupted behind my back. It sounded just like a freaking arc welder. It's like crack, 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 loud. You know, I have an arc welder, so I know it sounded just like it. And I'm like, what the hell's going on, you know? And I'm looking at him, and I said, do you hear that? And he doesn't say anything. He's just staring at me, you know? So that crackling sound started moving from the back of me onto the right-hand wall, and it starts moving up the wall at a 45-degree angle. You know, crack, 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 crack. And I'm not seeing anything. There's no light. There's all it is a sound moving. And it wasn't quick. It just took its time about getting up there. And I'm switching my attention between him and this crackling because I'm thinking he's going to attack, as weird as he looks. So I didn't want to keep my eyes off of him for too long. So I'm like, and then it goes over his head so I could watch him and where the crackle sound is coming from at the same time. And it's just crackling right across the roof, the ceiling of my office. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall, kind of where I'm sitting, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right near my leg. And it's crackling in that trash can, inches from my leg. And I bend over and I look in there, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Not even a piece of paper. The inmate porter had cleaned it that night. And then it goes boom, and it's done. It's done. Shuts up. Quiet. You know, and I'm like, whoa, you know, because this went on from at least a minute, maybe 2 minutes. It wasn't like a short crack. It was like, you know, and I'm like looking at him, and I push my chair against the back of the wall because I'm thinking he may attack. And he's not moving. And you sit there just staring at me with that weird glare in his eye. It wasn't an angry glare. It was like a zombie glare. You know, it wasn't like he was mad. It was just this strange zombie glare. And then he slowly gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And I'm like, get the hell out of here. Go. And he just shuffles and didn't walk. He shuffled down the hall. And after he's gone, I'm like shocked. I'm absolutely shocked. And I start examining the walls for any marks. And I was, at that point, I was starting to think I was getting crazy. I was losing it. I was getting psychotic. You know, whatever was causing psychosis on them is now getting to me. And I examine the wall. There's nothing there. There's nothing on the walls. You know, I go out into the hallway. The doctor isn't in yet. The nurses aren't in yet. The offices are all locked up and closed. There's nothing could have accounted for that. And I was totally stunned. I mean, my mind was blown. I didn't think they could affect physical reality, you know, but that was physical reality. Now, I saw one prisoner showed me scratches he had across his back. He said came from the voices. It was like 4 fingers just ran across his back, and you could see the blood, the scratches. When I saw that, I'm like, yeah, I wasn't quite sure where to make it. But when I saw this, it was like, yeah, they can affect physical reality. And I'm like, this is getting really weird. You know, I don't know where this is going. I don't know the rules. I don't have a map. I don't know anybody who's talking about this kind of stuff. You know, this is another world that's right here with us now that nobody sees except me. You know, and maybe some of these other people who wrote about, you know, ghosts and stuff like that. So that wasn't the end of it. Now, I didn't call this guy back for about 4 months, but I finally called him back, and he came in. He looked good. His energy was good. He wasn't depressed. I said, but you're looking good. I mean, I didn't expect you to be in this kind of shape. You have good energy. And you look good. He goes, yeah, I've been doing what you told me. I haven't got rid of the voices, but it's like a Mexican standoff. They haven't gained any ground either. And I said, have a seat. You know, and we did some small talk. And then I said, do you remember the last time you were in here? And he goes, yeah. I said, did you hear that crackling sound? He goes, yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised you did. So that was a big relief to me. Like somebody else heard it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Other than me,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And he goes, that was them. I said, them who? He said, the voices. And I said, what in the blazes were they trying to do? He said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, they did a damn good job of it. And then I asked him, I said, when you got up to leave, you looked like some kind of zombie. I mean, you weren't walking with a regular gait like you entered with just now. You shuffled out. You know, what was going through your head when you left my office? Because you didn't look like the same person you are now. And I said, what were the voices telling you? He said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like,
It's good he didn't listen.
yeah, they're dangerous.
So Jerry, the last thing that I'm gonna say is, when that entity said you have no right to tell us how to live our lives,
Yeah.
things like that.
You have no right to interfere with our way of life.
It's actually not true, because we do have the right. Jesus gave us the right to.
Not according to them.
Yeah, but they're afraid of him.
Yeah, they're afraid of us. They're afraid of us knowing about them.
If they're afraid of Jesus.
Yeah, they hate Jesus. They hate God. They hate
that's
Jesus. They hate anything to do with religion. They hate prayer. They hate good people. They hate preachers. They hate kids. They hate marriages. They hate us. They hate us as a race.
God bless you once again. Thank you for everything that you do. I'm gonna put all the links in the description below. So guys, buy Jerry's book. If you need help, reach out by email, and you're gonna find all the information on your website.
Oh yeah, I should have sent you. I didn't send you a book, huh?
No,
Oh, bummer.
no worries. I'm gonna read it. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
God bless you.
From the bottom of my heart, I would love to say thank you for watching this episode till the very end. Now click on this video because you have to watch it. Click this video right now, watch it, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Thank you. Click right here, right now.